Sol Jihu's eyes slowly turned scarlet.
The atrocious crimson blaze resembled the eyes of a gargoyle.
Wait a minute. That skill.
One of the 5 defectors, the young man who had previously expressed disappointment to Sol Jihu, furrowed his brow. Being a warrior like Sol Jihu, he was thinking of a certain skill.
He was confused because that skill could not be learned at level 6.
It was unlocked at level 7.
Su! Sol Jihu took a deep breath, his head slowly tilting back.
His hair began to stand on end one by one in response to the explosive energy. The young man flinched as 2 crimson rays of light shot out of Sol Jihu's eyes. A skill that converts emotion into anger, which doubles the power of all skills involved in combat without the danger of losing one's sanity.
Level 7 Starseeker, Awakening Skill, Berserk. Hoo-ah! Sol Jihu's mouth dropped open and an ear-splitting roar echoed throughout the mountain range.
At the appalling cry, the 5 defectors frowned in unison.
Others also covered their ears or staggered with shock. Sol Jihu kicked the ground.
As he quickly closed the distance between him and his prey, he thrust his spear forward.
Clang!
A long sword parried the blow. The young man was the only one who managed to react in time. Sol Jihu's prey, the woman, slowly turned her gaze to the long sword in front of her, which was shaking violently as it ground against the spear.
Get hold of yourself!
The young man shouted in frustration. Immediately the woman crossed her hands, each holding a katana, and swung her arms forward. The young man had managed to block the attack, but his strength was clearly inferior to that of their enemies, and she could see the spear pushing his long sword back. The giant, too, came to his senses and hurriedly pulled out his battle axe and swung it at the enemy.
He intended to send the enemy flying along with his spear. However, the spear didn't even budge, it only stopped moving. But the next moment he realized he was mistaken even about that. With a cry, the white spear began to emit stronger waves of energy. Ah! Ah! This greatly surprised the giant. Not 1, not 2, but 3 people were pouring all their strength into stopping the spear, but their efforts were to no avail. Everyone was generating mana as quickly as possible, but the spear kept getting faster every second. Kook! He's a monster. Do something.
The giant whimpered, his face covered with sweat. SSSK.
He heard the wind.
Sol Jihu's eyes quickly scanned both sides. The remaining 2 people quickly rushed from left and right towards Sol Jihu. The trio momentarily lost their balance and staggered when Sol Jihu pulled back his spear.
He immediately swung his spear to the left. The opponent quickly backed away as if that had been his intention from the start.
The other assassin did not miss this opportunity and rushed to stab Sol Jihu. It was then.
Yuk! Suddenly a small, slender hand grabbed his wrist.
Your playmate is me.
Hoshino Urara appeared behind the enemy like a ghost. She jumped and tightened her legs around the enemy's waist. She twisted his wrist and then began to stab him in the neck with the other hand.
The enemy struggled to escape.
Move back! The woman shouted after regaining her balance.
The 4 of them, except for the one fighting Hoshino Urara, surrounded Sol Jihu in the blink of an eye. Don't be an overachiever. Just keep him in check by tagging in and out.
The woman quickly grasped the situation and muttered.
She then raised her arm and signaled the soldiers to surround the rest of the Valhalla members, not Sol Jihu.
It was a smart decision on her part. Her plan was thus. One would keep Hoshino Urara busy while the other 4 fought Sol Jihu, and in the meantime, the rest would take care of Un Yuri, Chung Chohong, and the remaining 2. The black smoke that freed Seo Yuhui concerned the woman, but her team was composed of many high rankers. She felt confident that they could hold out. It was then that she heard a resonant voice. Freeze! A layer of frosty mist spread around Un Yuri. The raindrops froze and became sharp thorns that fell on her enemies. Ow!
That hurts. What the fuck is going on? A single thorn did not cause much damage, but when dozens of them hit at once, her enemies began to falter and shake their arms wildly.
Yuri shouted yet again, sweat dripping down her face. "Rise!"
Her voice resounded beautifully.
Whoosh!
At the exact locations where the enemies had stopped to block the ice thorns, sudden streams of water spewed into the air from the ground soaked with rain.
The water froze as soon as it touched the frosty mist. It was as if a fountain had just been turned on and then frozen.
Screams of fear erupted from everywhere. The lucky ones were thrown into the air and the unlucky ones were pierced by the frozen stream of water, their bodies hanging mindlessly in the air.
"Damn it! Take care of the magician fur."
The woman began to yell but couldn't finish her sentence, because Sol Ji-hoo was charging at her at incredible speed.
Cho-hong took a step towards Sol Ji-hoo and then stopped. "That crazy magician bitch! Damn it, my feet!"
"Don't kill her right away. Don't let her get away so easily." The ones who escaped or recovered from the magic attack were racing towards Yuri. Seo Yu-hui was in no condition to fight currently, and Floan was in charge of protecting her. This meant that Yuri was wide open to enemy attacks.
Cho-hong knew well the terrible end that a magician would meet without a keeper. And so, she turned towards Yuri.
It was then. SSSSHK. She heard something sharp flying through the air just past her ear. Immediately, an enemy collapsed with a pig-like squeal.
An arrow had ripped through his skull.
SSSHK. SSSHK.
With each successive sound, the enemies fell to the ground one by one. Valhalla! There was yet another roar.
The barbarian champion rushed onto the scene like an angry bull and slashed the neck of an enemy who was staggering after being hit by an arrow. He then chased after an enemy who was targeting Yuri and smashed him in the head with his weapon. Each time the warrior's shining halberd spun, an enemy fell to the ground, and Cho-hong's face brightened.
"Hey! Way to go, Hugo! Oi!" She then heard a voice from behind.
When she turned back, a bottle full of transparent liquid flew at her. "You look like you've taken a blow.
Use that to heal." Snake eyes, Audrey Baszler grinned as she knocked another arrow to the bow.
Cho-hong removed her hand from her side and clenched her fists.
Now everything was clear. She had no idea how, but Valhalla's team too was here.
Cho-hong opened the cap with her blood-stained hand, emptied the healing potion in one gulp, and began to run.
Meanwhile, the 5 level 6s also realized the arrival of enemy reinforcements. But there was nothing they could do. They were busy dealing with problems of their own.
Tagging in and out was a technique used by a group of people against a smaller group of elites, in which members took turns fighting enemies and exhausting their forces. As time passed, however, it became clear that this technique was exhausting the 4 of them faster than Sol Ji-hoo.
Uaaah. With a roar, the giant swung his arms towards the ground. But his battle axe continued to smash the ground, not the enemy. It was a strange phenomenon. Sol Ji-hoo remained in the same spot, only slightly twisting his body from time to time, yet all the attacks missed him. It was as if a mysterious force was forcing the axe to slide down whenever it touched Sol Ji-hoo's skin. "You little rat!"
This time the giant stretched out his arm in anger. He was going to grab Sol Ji-hoo and then smash him with the axe, but Sol Ji-hoo blocked the giant's arm first. Sol Ji-hoo pushed the arm in the opposite direction and the giant spun in place like a figure skater.
"You!" He spun and spun before falling on his butt.
The woman threw a dozen poisoned daggers towards the enemy, but when she saw them all coming back to her, she backed away in horror. The young man was on his way to save the giant when Sol Ji-hoo suddenly turned the spear towards him.
He quickly raised his sword. Clang! Kook! The collision almost tore his hand. But this wasn't the end.
Strands of golden sword chi shot out from the tip of the spear and rushed at the young man.
The young man twisted his upper body and managed to deflect the sword chi. However, he felt a sudden pain in his left shoulder.
The young man was thrown into confusion as he let out a sharp cry. He had blocked the spear and avoided the sword chi. So why? But there was no time to think as the invisible spear moved once again towards his chest.
Formless spear,
the young man shouted upon realization.
Sol Jihu gave a small grin. I thought you'd all be like Miss Agnes. Well, at least you're better than your friends.
As he prepared to chase the young man, a strange sound rang out in the dark.
A hand pulled on the bow and a pair of eyes gleamed brightly. Now! When Sol Jihu shot forward, the archer let go of the string.
His arrow flew silently and quickly towards Sol Jihu. It was then.
A blue light flashed between the two. Clang! The light bounced off the arrow and quickly traveled towards the archer.
The archer jerked back immediately, but the light slashed the air in front of him and he felt blood dripping down his face.
The speed was just astounding. Who? The archer flinched.
HMPH.
A female swordsman was staring at him, her sword hanging by her side. Oh Rahi! So you know me. Who are you?
Care to take off that mask for me?
Oh Rahi gave a light chuckle as she played with her hair.
The archer grabbed his chest and bit his lips. An Imperial Knight.
The enemy had gained yet another level 6. Damn it!
Enraged, the giant raised himself.
Hey! What do you want me to do?
This is nothing like US.
Swish!
As he turned towards the woman, the sound of metallic chains rang out and the giant staggered. A sickle chain wound around his left arm. What the hell? The giant pulled his arm back towards himself.
But his opponent wasn't an easy one to deal with. He saw a man at least a head taller than him pulling the chain from the other side. It was Vlad Halep. Kiun. He could move his arm slightly if he pulled hard.
But the giant soon realized it wasn't the time for a tug of war. Because in the distance, a warrior with a mace in her hand was running towards him.
All right. Keep him there.
Cho Hong leapt into the air, her silver hair swinging out behind her shoulders.
You bastard.
You're so dead.
She raised the thorn of steel above her head and looked down at the enemy with eyes full of contempt. The giant clenched his teeth.
Now he had no choice but to swing his axe with only one arm.
The woman and the young man's complexion waned. They had just lost 2 of their comrades.
And then, sorry, we're late.
A man soaked in rain flew through the air and landed on the ground behind Sol Jihu. I meant to come earlier, but we had to cross a lot of mountains.
Kazuki explained as he wiped the rain from his face. Sol Jihu smiled.
No, you're right on time. I'll cover you from behind.
Don't kill them.
I have a use for those 5. All right. I'll tell the others, replied Kazuki while knocking another arrow to his bow.
That bastard, he's a level 7 on the brink of level 8. What? Meanwhile, the young man and the woman shared a brief conversation as well. It's true. That absurd battle power has to be from using Berserk. My close combat technique is at the pinnacle rank, but it didn't even stand a chance against him. That must mean he also has ethereal shift. As much as I don't want to admit it, he could have easily killed us if he wanted to.
Both when we were holding Seo Yuhui hostage and during the fight just now. He's toying with us. He wants to capture us alive. The young man's speculation was correct. After all, he had even witnessed Sol Jihu instructing the black smoke not to kill. Buy me some time. When he saw Sol Jihu point his spear at him, the young man took a deep breath and tightened the grip around his sword. Protect me, just for a moment. Predict where he'll move and get there before him. Kazuki will probably shoot you once or twice, so be prepared for that. The woman nodded without hesitation.
She was the team leader, but the young man was stronger than her. An earthling who was once called a sword genius. The tide had turned against them, but she believed that the young man could find a way out of all this.
Okay. The woman answered shortly and the young man jumped back. He quickly increased the distance between himself and the enemy before lifting his arms towards the sky. The blade of his sword stretched like the Monkey King's magical staff and then shrank back again. The next moment he shook his arm, and the blade split in two.
Sol Jihu furrowed his brow.
4, 8, 16, 32.
Every time the young man shook his sword, its blade doubled in number.
No way.
Kazuki muttered shortly.
1,000 sword.
So Sin Young is involved in this too?
1,000 sword. He'd heard of that name before.
He recalled that when Zhang Maldong first mentioned the name, he had burst into laughter.
Meanwhile, the number of blades increased to 64, 128, and then 256. That could be a bit. Tong. Sol Jihu hurriedly used ethereal shift. He emerged behind the young man, but the woman guarding his target quickly stepped in between them. Sol Jihu used ethereal shift again. And then, he saw 512 blades flying towards him.
The young man seemed to have thrown his sword at Sol Jihu the moment he spotted him. When Sol Jihu used ethereal shift for the third time, the woman persistently chased him and tried to keep him away from the young man.
So annoying.
Sol Jihu reached out with his left arm, and mana spears in the form of sword chi shot out of his palm in bundles.
The woman tried to avoid the spears but instead fell to one knee with a sharp shriek. Her ankle burned with pain. Kazuki had predicted her movement and promptly pierced her ankle with an arrow.
Sol Jihu looked back at his target.
The young man was withdrawing his sword and its blades.
But something was different this time. Instead of merging into one, the blades surrounded the young man and formed a tight film around him that was shaped like an igloo or an upside-down bowl.
Should he use ethereal shift again to penetrate the enemy's defense? Or should he attempt to avoid the attack?
Sol Jihu agonized over the decision before kicking the ground with all his might. Sol Jihu's unique spatial ability, Thousand Thunder.
Peetst.
The golden sparks that began at his feet shot up quickly and wrapped Sol Jihu's entire body. At the same time, inside the self-made barrier, the young man initiated a technique that he'd compressed 10 times.
François Delon's unique spatial ability, 1024 swords.
He jerked his long sword, and the blades surrounding him opened up. Like a budding flower in the spring, a flower bloomed in an ocean of blood and rain. The 1024 blades seemed to form the shape of a blooming lotus flower as they stretched in all directions. The next moment the young man rushed towards Sol Jihu, turning his sword towards his enemy. At the same time, all the blades turned in the direction in which the young man was moving and flew towards the enemy like a wave. There was something fearful about the way the blades moved in unison, but Sol Jihu's eyes remained calm. He suddenly recalled Zhang Maldong's words.
Let's see you laughing when you face 1,000 swords flying straight at you.
Brat, don't ridicule them unless you've pioneered your own independent realm and can stand toe-to-toe with them. He couldn't laugh.
He didn't want to. But his heart was pounding. He couldn't wait to find out who was better, himself or his opponent. Through rigorous training, both had reached a realm of their own.
The sparks around Sol Jihu's body flowed into the spear of purity and gathered at its tip. Sol Jihu's eyes shot open as he pointed his spear in front of him. Sol Jihu's unique spatial ability, Hell Severing. Whoosh! The mana receded from the spear like a wave and was converted into innumerable lightning flashes.
The 1,000 blades and 1,000 thunder violently crashed against each other. As the two forces became intertwined, an enormous explosion shook the ground and the ensuing light brightened the battlefield. The blades pierced and dug through the crevices in between the lightning and blocked its movement.
Everyone stopped what they were doing and turned their eyes to the great tug-of-war. But this deadlock did not last long. In the glare of the light, the young man saw a bolt of lightning burst several of his blades as it rushed towards him.
It wasn't like he was outnumbered. In fact, his blades were larger in number, but he was still overpowered by the enemy.
He felt as if he had sent out a wave only to witness a tsunami devour it. Alas, even the mightiest storms eventually come to an end, vanquished by the vastness of the sea. Such was the way of life. Soon the golden light completely swallowed the white light and reached its destination, the young man.
Ooh-ah-ar.
The lightning burned and twisted inside the young man, and he screamed in agony.
Peetst. The young man suddenly stopped. His entire body began to shake violently. It was as if he had become a puppet and a hand was pulling his strings.
As the light began to fade away, a low groan of pain escaped his mouth.
Koo-ah. Stagger.
He stumbled and fell like a puppet whose strings had been severed.
Black smoke rose from the body still enveloped in sparks. Who?
Sol Jihu let out a long breath. The consecutive use of advanced skills near the end had consumed a lot of mana. The
woman became speechless.
The strongest among them had turned into a lump of charcoal in the blink of an eye. Look, I have a question for you.
The woman slowly raised her eyes from the ground. She saw Sol Jihu approaching her, the shaft of his spear resting against his shoulder.
That guy just now. I guess he makes sense, but how did the four of you become level 6? Don't come.
How disappointing. I had high expectations for you.
Or maybe I'm just too strong for.
Sol Jihu paused in the middle of his sentence.
Suddenly, his eyes shot wide open and he leapt backward.
Tang! A gunshot rang out.
It happened almost simultaneously that Sol Jihu jerked away and a fist-sized hole formed on the ground where he had just stood.
Sol Jihu immediately turned towards the sound.
His eyes narrowed. Thanks to the golden winged phoenix, he could clearly see the uninvited guests despite the distance. Atop a nearby cliff, hundreds of figures stood, lined up in an orderly fashion as they pointed their guns down below.
If he wasn't mistaken, it was definitely an army of evil phantoms.
The parasites had entered the scene.
Finally! They're here! The woman exclaimed in joy.
Sol Jihu glanced at her. This didn't seem to be a coincidence, the woman had called the parasites here. You guys, joined hands with the parasites?
I had my doubts. Energy returned to the woman's voice. Who would have thought they would actually come? So the bishop was right.
The situation took Sol Jihu by surprise.
He didn't think they would have gone that far already.
But then again, a lot of time had passed since the Arden Valley War, and things could have easily changed in the meantime. Sol Jihu licked his lips nervously.
It's them!
The woman shouted as she pointed at Sol Jihu.
Did you receive the bishop's message?
We're your allies.
They're your targets.
She said like a child tattling on a classmate, and the evil phantoms moved their perforated arms in unison. They aimed their guns at the humans without masks.
This must be why she kept on blabbering. She was trying to buy time.
Sol Jihu bit his lower lip. Fortunately, he didn't detect any army commanders among them, but an army of evil phantoms wasn't an easy foe to face either. After all, they had managed to knock Agnes unconscious with just one blow when she was level 6, and she hadn't let her guard down at all.
They're stronger than they seem. Please hurry.
The woman urged again, and immediately the sound of gunshots rang out.
And then, tang, tang, tang. There were sparks everywhere. The woman blinked rapidly. In an instant, hundreds of white discs surrounded Sol Jihu's body and bounced off all bullets. A barrier, powerful enough to bounce off an evil phantom's attack and elaborate enough to defend against dozens of enemies at the same time. There was only one priest in all of paradise that could create a barrier of this caliber. Seo Yuhui slowly got up from the ground, tightening her robe.
The stone statue in her hand had turned to ashes and was being washed away by the pouring rain.
The statue was Moirai's souvenir. Paradise's legend was back. No way! The woman screamed in disbelief. Unaltered by her reaction, Seo Yuhui yanked the cross from around her neck.
Her usual warm and friendly self was gone, and she glared at the enemy like an evil sorceress.
Soon, the proof of castetes began glowing. Level 7 Evangelist. Wide area debuff.
Jade light sonata.
Light streamed over the cliff. Pillars of light rose from the ground like piano keys, forming a cage that imprisoned the evil phantoms. Seo Yuhui closed her eyes and slowly raised her chin.
A halo appeared above her head. As if responding to its light, the inky darkness of the sky began to fade away and the first hint of dawn colored the sky bright.
Seo Yuhui opened her eyes. Stars. Level 8 Atera Sanctus. Wide area buff, debuff. Requiem of stars.
The sky split in two and stars began to fall from the gap. They fell like waterfalls towards the evil phantoms, drooping long tails behind them like comets.
Ki! A mournful roar resounded across the sky. The light from the stars that fell near the cliff spread around and brightened the area. Sol Jihu nodded approvingly and turned around. The woman was standing motionlessly in front of him. She seemed unaware that she had dropped her katana on the ground. She was clearly in shock.
Quite a day, huh?
Sol Jihu snickered as he began to walk slowly towards the woman.
The tide had turned against her twice already.
He wondered how she felt now. Get away from me.
Don't come. The woman backed away from Sol Jihu and suddenly fell on her butt.
Her hands fumbled around the ground meaninglessly before abruptly stopping.
They had touched something.
Quote. The woman looked down unconsciously and doubted her eyes. What? She picked it up from the ground and slowly raised it to eye level, her hands shaking.
Is this?
Her voice trembled. Her red lips, only partly visible under her mask, quivered piteously.
What do you think it is?
Came the voice above her. The woman raised her head in a flash. Her throat throbbed painfully.
You just noticed?
Sol Jihu was grinning, his fangs glowing white like pearls in the dark. The woman moved her trembling fingers. Kinda slippery, right?
Sol Jihu said with a smile.
I had no choice. It's transparent.
You guys might have noticed if it reflected moonlight, so I applied a special coating that minimizes the reflected light. However, none of his words entered the woman's ears.
Her mind was in chaos from realizing what she had done. After meaninglessly sweeping her hand on the ground, she managed to grab hold of something. No, it can't be. She muttered inwardly while slowly picking the object up to her eyes.
Quote.
When she saw the transparent crystal orb riddled with mud and rainwater, she held her breath. The crystal orb that was faintly shining in her trembling hand. Was none other than a communication crystal. Asterisk. Going back in time to when the group ambushed Valhalla's main team, Philip Muller was impatiently waiting in Oder's central plaza. Then, his eyes shot open as soon as the crystal orb emitted a faint light. He immediately infused his mana into it, connecting the bidirectional call and displaying a certain scene on the orb. Reporting. All members waiting at each of the gates have received the call. A timely report came in. What should we do? Start right away. Philip Muller replied a beat later from being too focused on the video. The middle-aged magician who came to report on the situation nodded his head with a somewhat nervous expression. Quote. He quickly chanted a spell before raising his hands up high. Arxea Acedia. In an instant, a formless orb formed on this palm and swiftly shot up to the night sky. Quang! A terrifying explosion resounded in the entire city.
Crepitus, a spell that creates a clangorous noise. Quang. Quang.
Crepitus did not end with just one use.
As the entire area of odors shook, people drinking liquor at the pub and people enjoying their dreams all rushed outside in a startle. The city turned clamorous in an instant. Philip Muller looked around his surroundings before opening his palm toward the communication crystal in his left hand.
He then muttered calmly, "Expansion."
Immediately, something surprising happened. The crystal orb floated up before shooting up to the sky and enlarging the scene being played inside.
Like a ripple, the scene spread out and turned into a huge cinema screen like something from a movie theater.
People, who were running to the plaza, slowed down as they caught sight of this screen and tilted their heads.
This didn't just happen at the plaza. Large screens floated up one by one in the east, west, north, and south of the city.
The screen in the plaza showed the entire layout of the campsite, while the eastern screen showed Seoul Jihu and the western screen showed the woman and the group of mysterious assailants. Each screen was showing a different point of view of the same place.
And so, how?
The city that had fallen dead silent began to stir.
Notify that odor's screening has started and tell the man on the east gate to zoom in on the male lead's face.
As Philip Muller muttered quietly, the middle-aged magician immediately took out a new communication crystal.
Philip Muller slowly sat down at the fountain in Odor's Plaza while maintaining his mana.
How? Don't you get what's happening?
The movie screening finally began. A mockumentary, using every single one of humanity's cities as theaters, and the audience being every paradisian and earthling. It wasn't just Odor where this sequence of events unfolded.
Quang. In Eva. Quang.
In Haremark.
Quang.
And in Scheherazade.
The 7 cities under humanity's jurisdiction all erupted with explosive booms before 5 screens popped up in the center and the 4 cardinal directions. What do you mean?
Isn't Gorad Boga what you want?
Isn't that why you're here? To steal it from us?
This isn't Gorad Boga. What? The bishop said he confirmed it personally.
Can you be any more stupid?
And here I was thinking you'd at least have a brain. In Eva, Charlotte Aria was watching the movie, snacking on desserts that her maid brought over. Meanwhile, Adelette Delphine was sitting next to her, busily maintaining an enlarged screen. And in Haremark.
What happened? Teresa ran out in a startle, thinking that the parasites had initiated an attack, and then became dazed. But even that only lasted a moment.
We've been waiting here in ambush for several days now. In other words, we knew you would be coming here.
Don't tell me.
Finally.
That's right. You've been running circles on the bishop's palm this whole time. In a few minutes, Teresa was leaning on the terrace, resting her chin on the back of her cupped hands, and watching the movie with an engrossed look. Let me ask you something.
It was the same for Cinzia and Agnes. Attacking Yuhui Nuna and Haremark. Trying to besmirch my name. Were you guys responsible for those things as well? Ah. That? Did the bishop order you guys to do that too?
You just figured it out?
Well, our bishop is pretty scrupulous in how he does things. They stared at the screen for a long time. Then. You guys.
Huh.
Ah. Sorry. I must have gotten too absorbed in my role. Yes, you can come here now. Looks like we already got most of the important information out of her. Well said.
After hearing Seoul Jihu's last line, Cinzia tilted her head back.
Ah ha 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 ha. She burst into laughter, clapping loudly. Even Agnes was holding back her laughter with her head lowered.
What a twist.
Is this a mockumentary?
Comedy under the guise of a serious documentary?
How comedic.
The rawness of this film is an obvious sign that it's a B-grade movie. After laughing to her heart's content, Cinzia evaluated the movie while wiping her tears.
It's quite excellent for a low-budget, independent film. Agnes also chimed in. Asterisk.
Same time.
Thousand Sword.
So Sin Young is involved in this too? Yun Seahui had woken up from her sleep and was also watching the movie.
Standing by her window, she stared at the giant screen encompassing the night sky.
Her dazed eyes seemed hollow for some reason. How much time went by? You guys joined hands with the parasites?
I had my doubts. Who would have thought they would actually come? So the bishop was right.
Next, as the evil phantoms summoned by the woman's call aimed at Valhalla's members, Yun Seahui turned her gaze down.
A large group of men was running toward the plaza.
However, hundreds of people were already occupying the plaza. The group of men that rushed to the plaza flinched after seeing another group of men clad in black suits.
Turn that screen off this instant. The man at the head of the group shouted. Who dares to be so bold in Scheherazade? Turn it off now. Do you want to die? The men in black suits snorted at the laughable threat.
The man at the head turned red with anger.
You motherfuckers. Now, why don't you calm down a bit?
At that moment, a relaxed voice rang out. In the center of the plaza, a man raised his hand, sitting in front of a table that was covered with a white cloth.
I'm trying to enjoy this movie.
Why are you raising a fuss?
Where did you learn your manners to be yapping in the middle of a movie? He spoke while swirling a glass of red wine. Not to mention, we've got a lady here too.
The chief of the triads, Hao Win, subtly tilted his body to the side and smiled at the woman sitting next to him.
Excuse me, mademoiselle. I'm thinking of cleaning up these intruders. Crunch, crunch.
The hand of the woman watching the movie while munching on popcorn halted.
She turned to the side with her hand still inside the popcorn box, and the man's face contorted with shock. Beck.
Beck Haiju, the woman wearing a white ceremonial robe, stared at the man fixedly and then wiped away the caramel stain around her mouth.
She then grabbed the jade-colored spear leaning against the table.
Hao Win smirked, seeing the man back away hesitantly.
He leaned back on his chair and calmly went back to watching the movie. Gee, get away from me.
Don't come. You just noticed?
The movie was nearing the end. The screen moved, spinning slowly until it showed the woman up close. The scene shook faintly from the trembling hand of the woman holding the crystal orb.
Ellipsis. The woman's dazed face slowly got bigger as she brought the crystal orb closer to her eyes.
Then, as her face filled nearly half of the screen. Pook! Awk! With a blunt thud, a short scream rang out and the screen shook crazily. The scene inside the screen rolled 3 or 4 times. It seemed the woman had dropped the crystal orb. And soon, as the screen stopped rolling, it showed the woman helplessly collapsing to the ground. Inside the pouring rain, blood flowing out of the woman's mask mixed into the mud and spread out.
Perhaps because the muddy water got on the crystal, the screen looked dark overall.
Almost like the scene was fading out. The movie was almost over, but Hao Win didn't get up from his seat.
What will you do? When Ming Jia walked up and asked, Hao Win waved his hand dismissively.
We haven't gotten to the most important part, so we gotta stick around.
After watching an inspiring movie, it was proper manners to stay seated until the very end.
As such, Hao Win planned to see the end credits, which would show the names of the cast and crew, no matter what. Asterisk. On the other hand, Luxuria's temple was in the middle of a late-night chaos. No, to be more precise, it was engulfed in awkward silence. The tension was rapidly reaching a breaking point.
Bishop. A female priest walked up and urged the stiffly frozen old man.
Only then did Bishop Roberto Servillo finally come to his senses. He still couldn't make out exactly what was going on. But one thing was for certain. Things had gone wrong. Majorly wrong. We sealed off the entrance. Let's hurry. In the next instant, the bishop pushed the female priest aside and ran out of the room. His name was mentioned directly, clear evidence had been provided, and even the parasites had appeared. He couldn't think of a way to spin himself out of this situation, so he planned to escape to Earth.
As expected of someone who rose to the position of a bishop, his quick judgment and instantaneous reaction were worthy of praise.
The problem was that his enemies were more than a few steps ahead of him. Quang! He rushed down to the first floor and raced toward the warp gate, but the tightly shut temple gate burst open.
Around 5 or so people walked in with big strides.
"Hello, Tilda. This is Valhalla's Team 1. The red-haired woman leading the way shouted sonorously. "As for why we're here,
well, I'm sure we don't need to tell you."
Shuiying. Phi Sora unsheathed her longsword and aimed it at the shell-shocked bishop.
"We only need one guy to come with us, so the rest of you may continue watching the movie."
"Of course, you're welcome to get in our way."
"What are you doing?"
The female priest, who hurriedly followed the bishop, shouted after seeing the intruders.
"Where do you think you are?"
"This is the sacred home of goddess Luxuria."
"You do not belong here." "Well, even if you say that, the temple will not be ordered around by outsiders. We will take care of our own problems, so leave this place this instant."
Why do I even need to respond to such bullshit?" Phi Sora snorted. "Fine. I guess the goddess might not be too pleased.
I'll pray to Luxuria Nim later and work this out."
"Is that okay, Luxuria Nim?"
"What absurd."
"Sure, go ahead."
Before the female priest could say anything, a sensual voice resounded in the temple.
The female priest flinched in shock. Even Phi Sora looked flustered as she didn't expect Luxuria to reply back. I guess she's had enough of traitors cosplaying as priests and operating her temp. Flash!
Before she could finish her sentence, a flash of light burst out.
A cluster of light came hurtling from the stairs before going back to its original location and striking the female priest holding a crucifix.
The female priest fell down the stairs screaming.
Phi Sora blinked.
Before she noticed, Yu-jin was standing in front of her with his shield.
"That's a good shield."
"Was that a reflection ability?"
Phi Sora asked, seeing steam rising from the shield.
"Yes. I got it from my last expedition." Yu-jin answered as he adjusted his glasses.
"Ho!
That's pretty generous of those guys."
Anyway.
Grabbing Yu-jin's shoulder and launching herself forward, Phi Sora flew up.
"I'll say it again. You're welcome to get in our way."
Landing on the floor, she stabbed her longsword into the female priest's back as she was slowly picking herself back up. A short scream burst out. "Hoi!"
Phi Sora lifted the skewered female priest and then waved her around.
"But don't blame us if you end up like this, alright?"
Keek! Cock!
The sword blade, which pierced through the female priest's stomach, twisted left and right.
Phi Sora then swung the priest off, saying she was too loud.
As the female priest fell to the floor in tatters, the dazedly staring priests subconsciously took backward steps.
It was then. Kung! The sound of something falling rang out. The path to the warp gate had been blocked off by Marcel Guionia before anyone noticed. Even so, the bishop turned around and ran. It was in the direction of the temple storage.
Correct.
Marcel Guionia, who was preparing to shoot, lowered his bow. It was because he could see one of his teammates running after the bishop. Kook!
The madly running bishop suddenly felt himself lose control over his body.
Should he say that the surrounding air got heavier?
The surrounding gravity seemed to have gotten stronger all of a sudden.
It wasn't a delusion.
Beads of sweat formed on his forehead, and his arms and legs were flailing around against his will. Despite this, the bishop did not stop running.
Hiya!
It's a lovely day, isn't it?
But in the next moment, he jumped in a startle.
A girl was running in the air next to him. Though, it would be more correct to say she was flying. But where are you going?
This isn't the way to the warp gate.
Is there something in the storage room?
The girl asked while jogging in the air.
The bishop stared at the girl with doubtful eyes before reflexively grabbing the crucifix hanging on his neck.
Hello!
Yi Sol-ah, who was running next to the bishop with an innocent smile, furrowed her brows. "You're supposed to reply if someone asks a question." Yelling angrily, she twisted her body in the air.
Her spinning leg struck the bishop's throat perfectly. Kuhuk! Crash!
Just as the bishop tried to get up after tumbling down in an unsightly way.
Clang! He was forced to freeze with the sound of breaking glass. He could feel something shaking above his head.
As he stealthily rolled his pupils up, he saw a wobbling arrow fletching that dug deep into the temple's wall.
Ah! I missed.
Huh? What was that? We're not dealing with a parasite, so he'll die if we hit his face?
Ah! I guess you're right, Aura.
But shouldn't we treat traitors like parasites? The bishop stared at the mumbling Yi Sol-ah while looking as if he had instantly aged by 10 years. Unless he was seeing things, the arrow had created a deep, whirlpool-like crater around its point of impact. Realizing that no tricks would allow him to escape, his limbs went limp.
This bastard! As the bishop stumbled down, Maria came running in and then pounced on the bishop. You dare to scheme against us, against Valhalla.
You dare to call yourself the bishop of the Temple of Luxuria? You damned traitor!
She slapped his face again and again with tears flowing down her face.
Considering how shocked she must be as a fellow priest of Luxuria, it was understandable for her to be angry to the point of crying. But why did it look like she was crying tears of joy?
Regardless, what she said was perfectly fine. The problem was with her hand movements.
After capturing an enemy, the normal thing would be to neutralize them or tie them up. But you're the bishop. You're a level 6.
Maria was busy stealing various accessories including the mitral and the crucifix artifact.
This is it.
You hopeless son of a bitch. Maria undressed the bishop in a flash before grabbing him by his hair.
You evil son of a bitch. I'll have to investigate you thoroughly.
Who knows what you're hiding? Open your personal storage box. You better listen if you don't want to die. Got that? Maria bellowed and then dragged the bishop through the corridor by his hair.
Yi Sol-ah was about to ask where she was going but flinched in fright.
Dollar signs were spinning in Maria's pupils. Wow!
Phi Sora dropped her jaw as she stared at Maria walking off hastily.
Can she get any more obvious? Ehu.
Why isn't there a single normal person in my team? She shook her head before shaking off the blood dripping from her longsword and running after Maria. She did not notice Yi Sung-jin looking at her uncomfortably. You're the one to say, team leader. Yi Sung-jin muttered quietly after recalling how Phi Sora killed the female priest. You're not wrong.
Marcel Guionia walked up and placed his hand on Yi Sung-jin's shoulder.
But if you're a man, you need to learn to speak your mind in front of the person in question.
I don't know.
Why don't you demonstrate it for me, Guionia hung. Not passing your responsibilities on to others is also what a man should do.
With that, Marcel Guionia quickly ran forward.
Yi Sung-jin quietly heaved out a sigh.
The situation quickly came to an end.
Valhalla first subdued the enemy and then climbed up the cliff to exterminate the evil phantoms trapped inside the Cage of Light. When he finished killing every last one of the evil phantoms, screeching in pain from the Requiem of Stars, Sol Ji-hoo raised his spear above his head so that people below could see. This was the cut sign.
Un Yuri flopped to the ground as soon as she saw the signal.
Controlling dozens of communication crystals and simultaneously using magic was certainly not an easy task.
Good job. Sol Ji-hoo gave Un Yuri a pat on the shoulder in appreciation.
Panting for breath, she barely managed to nod, her eyes a little puffy from fatigue. Then she threw a glance to the side. There, Seo Yuhui was kneeling on the ground, her hands roaming every inch of her own body.
Nuna. Sol Ji-hoo flinched when he saw her up close. Something was not right. Seo Yuhui was collecting rain with her hands and cleansing her body with it. Dirty. Dirty. She rubbed the nape of her neck, where the burly man had grabbed her. She rubbed all the other parts of her body where the man's gaze might have landed. All the while, she kept uttering the word, dirty. She rubbed with such a force that her skin began to redden and swell.
Her usual gentle self was gone, and a look of repulsion spread across her face like she'd just seen 1,000 maggots crawl across her skin.
Sol Ji-hoo could tell she was far from okay.
He asked carefully,
"Are you okay?"
Seo Yu-hui paused instantly. The revulsion clouding her eyes quickly receded and her face now beamed with hope, as if she had just witnessed the Messiah.
Jae Ji-hoo.
"Yes? What is it?"
"My neck."
"Your neck? Touch my neck."
"Hurry." It was an unexpected request, but Sol Ji-hoo quickly reached out.
His fingers brushed her long, delicate neck.
"Who?"
Seo Yu-hui grasped Sol Ji-hoo's hands, closed her eyes, and let out a long, restorative breath.
"Ha!"
There was something erotic about the way her heated breath touched his hands and her body trembled, soaked from head to toe with rain.
Sol Ji-hoo slowly pulled his hands away from her.
Seo Yu-hui opened her eyes halfway.
"Nuna, you should get to the tent." "I can't.
My legs won't move."
It kind of sounded like she was pouting.
"I'll help you. Let's go." Sol Ji-hoo picked Seo Yu-hui up from the ground and pulled her to his chest. Drenched in rain, he walked across the battlefield toward their campsite.
"I'm sorry."
Suddenly, a faint voice broke the awkward silence between the two.
"I thought I'd be okay."
Sol Ji-hoo lowered his gaze slowly.
He knew Moirai's souvenir had healed both her holy power and her body.
But the woman in his arms looked more tired than he had ever seen her. "Don't apologize." Sol Ji-hoo tried to sound cheerful.
"It's not a big deal."
"Not a big deal."
"Ah. The thing is, I know."
Sol Ji-hoo continued in a casual tone. "I first heard about it from Sung Shi-hyun, and the bishop also said something similar."
Seo Yu-hui remained silent and only furrowed her brow slightly.
"Actually, I've experienced something similar."
"I'm not a germaphobe, but I do have a compulsion of sorts."
Pardon?
"I'm not a germaphobe." Seo Yu-hui's voice suddenly became articulate.
After a moment of silence, Seo Yu-hui continued.
"I'm the apostle of luxuria." Conscious of the eyes watching them, her voice once again dwindled to a whisper. "In a way, an executor is like the incarnation of the god they serve."
Sol Ji-hoo nodded in silence.
He'd heard.
The higher their level, the more likely they were to be influenced by the gods they served. There were differences between individuals, of course, but earthlings usually came under this influence when they first became high rankers. The pressure intensified when they became unique rankers, but it was still bearable.
But things were a little different for executors.
Because executors received their powers directly from their gods, they were influenced more greatly than others. Not only their emotions but also their thoughts and actions were affected by their gods.
Once his thoughts reached this far, Sol Ji-hoo abruptly came to a halt. "And I'm a priest." The whisper continued. "Priests are closer to their gods than any other classes. So they're the most affected among all executors." The goddess that Seo Yu-hui served was Luxuria, the goddess of lust.
"Nuna?" Sol Ji-hoo asked in disbelief. "Don't tell me you're…" Once again Seo Yu-hui gave a long sigh and nodded.
"Wait. How bad is it? Let's just say that I didn't know it was going to be this bad."
Seo Yu-hui spoke slowly and with deliberation.
"It's not just men. Women are dangerous, too. Regardless of age or sex, and it's not only touching. Gaze, smell, any kind of stimulation. The lingering sensation of a touch or even pain." Seo Yu-hui's voice began to waver and she clamped her lips.
Sol Ji-hoo unwittingly closed his eyes.
"Don't you know her nickname?"
"It's Steel Wall."
Weren't you disgusted whenever you touched a man? Lady Xiao Yuhui avoids uncleanliness so much that it nears misophobia. She detested even the slightest touch from foreign things. For someone who avoided making contact with others like a plague to be hugging a man. The voices from the past raced through his head. Everyone had it wrong. They knew nothing about the truth. Xiao Yuhui wasn't misophobic. She had no choice but to put up a steel wall. Just as Qinzia suffered from lethargy, Xiao Yuhui, who served goddess Luxuria, was suffering from lust. The same was true of what had just happened.
She wasn't calling the burly man dirty.
It was an expression of self-hatred stemming from feeling excited and almost climaxing at the touch of a man who exposed and abused her, even if it was just acting.
You've been withholding it?
Yeah. Xiao Yuhui admitted with a blush. I'm a healthy woman. So, of course, I think about it. But I don't want to sleep with just anyone and let my desires get the best of me. Quote. But the more I endure my desires, the stronger they become. And the goddess influence is getting stronger, too. Lust was a primitive emotion that could be relieved to some extent by satisfying desires. But Xiao Yuhui refused to become an animal, driven only by its urges. She curled up in Sol Jihu's arms, hiding her face in embarrassment. The campsite was filling up and getting noisy. Sol Jihu adjusted his grip on Xiao Yuhui's arms and resumed walking. You should get some rest. Change your clothes, too. I'll be on the watch. Thanks. Xiao Yuhui gave a frail smile. After he dropped her off in the tent, Sol Jihu stepped outside and settled down near the entrance. He couldn't help but notice the sound of her clothes falling. No one came by except Un Yuri, who made a brief stop to pick up ropes to tie up the captives. Everyone was focused on post-battle activities. Or, more precisely speaking. Whoa! Looks like we hit a jackpot. Look at this equipment. A gold mine. It's a gold mine. They were identifying the dead and those who had fainted. All the while they were busy collecting weapons and equipment from them. What they were doing was nothing short of looting, but Sol Jihu did not stop them. He wouldn't have cared anyway, but Xiao Yuhui was occupying his mind, especially at this moment. Now that he knew her secret, everything seemed to fall in place. Why hadn't he noticed until now? It didn't take long for Sol Jihu to figure out the answer to that question. Subsequently, another question formed in his mind. Ever since their first meeting, to him specifically, Xiao Yuhui had been unable to overcome his curiosity. Sol Jihu turned and poked his face into the tent. Nuna. But Xiao Yuhui had already changed into clean clothes and was lying in her sleeping bag. Sol Jihu stared at Xiao Yuhui's sleeping face for a while before pulling his head out of the tent. He turned his eyes forward again, putting his question aside for the time being. The next morning, the rain that poured all night stopped like somebody turned off a faucet. Under the bright sunshine, the members of Valhalla finished their breakfast. All of them looked happy and content as they took down their tents and loaded their belongings into the carriages that Kazuki had brought along. Sure, they had won, but that wasn't the only reason. The quality of the weapons and equipment they had looted from the enemy was shockingly high. But then again, that was to be expected. This equipment was fit to be used by level 6s. Not even 100 of them existed in all of Paradise. The other loots were also of good quality, all at least level 4. The extra rewards from this mission were substantial. Valhalla took the 5 humans that led the attack as captives. Sol Jihu had hoped to capture them alive no matter what, and he got what he wanted. It was clear that whatever was in store for them from now on would be far from pleasant. The 5 couldn't look more pitiful. They were stripped of all clothing and had ropes tied to their waists. They also wore thick collars around their necks, which were connected to long chains tied to a nearby tree. In short, they were being treated like dogs rather than humans. Hey! Here's your breakfast. Cho-hong threw a pot in front of the captives. "You'll all have to run like crazy behind the carriage for the next few days. Don't you think you should save up some energy?" Cho-hong snickered as she looked down at the mixture that had spilled from the pot. It was a mixture of leftovers from their breakfast, basically an inedible garbage. "Aren't you being too nice?
These scumbags not only tried to kill us, but also betrayed humanity and joined hands with the parasites. But you're still giving them food? Kindness is one of my many fine qualities. What are you guys waiting for?
Go on, eat it." Audrey Basilar smirked and Cho-hong hastened the captives.
Aw. Is it because you're all tied up?
Well then, you should lick it like the dogs you are.
It was then a look of defiance crossed the face of the young man, who had been quiet until now. Cho-hong's words seemed to have hurt his pride.
"Look at this guy." Cho-hong gave a light chuckle, and then suddenly, all traces of joy disappeared from her face. She grabbed the young man's hair, and, "I guess this doesn't suit His Highness and his expensive tastes, does it? Kung?
Uup.
She slammed his face into the food waste.
Open your mouth.
Eat it."
She moved her hand left and right, rubbing the young man's face on the ground, then yanked his hair back and forced him to look her in the eye.
Bitches aren't supposed to complain about their food.
So what's with that look?
Pieces of garbage spattered on his face and the young man groaned. "All of you, eat. I'll give you 10 seconds.
Those who don't eat in 10 seconds, I'll make you wish you had." The remaining 4 flinched at Cho-hong's stare. "You don't like the food?
Do you need a dipping sauce or something? Spit." Cho-hong spat into the mixture.
"Will that even be enough? You need some salt if you really want to get the taste right."
Audrey Basilar smirked and shook her hair above the pot. Flakes of white dandruff fell into the mixture. Un Yuri, who was wrapping a leather strap around a tree branch to make a whip, cringed at the sight. She seemed disgusted.
But this was only the beginning. "What are you talking about?
Fragrance is what matters the most." Hugo shouted and crouched down above the pot. "FFFFFFT."
Everyone's face stiffened at the farting noise. The noise, which started out light and casual, suddenly became heavy and dull.
"Fuck." Hugo shot to his feet. He waddled across the field and disappeared in a hurry.
"Disgusting bastard." Oh, Rahi covered her mouth with one hand and retched. Finally, when Hoshino Urara pissed into the pot, Kazuki could no longer witness this abomination and fled the scene.
Cho-hong hesitated. She didn't want to go anywhere near the food covered with feces and urine.
"Stop it."
The woman finally broke down.
"What?
Stop. This is too cruel. At least let us."
It was then. "What's going on?" asked Sol Jihu as he walked toward them from the tent. "We have to leave soon. So why are you all gathered here?"
"Ha. Cho-hong hesitated. "We gave them breakfast, but they aren't eating."
"Breakfast?"
Sol Jihu glanced across the clearing and quickly realized the situation.
The utterly disgusting state of the food and the bits of debris across the young man's face were both dead giveaways.
He slowly turned his gaze and Cho-hong averted her eyes.
Audrey Basilar smiled nervously. "I was just trying to be nice, but they won't eat."
"I guess they're not hungry."
"What should we do?"
Sol Jihu let out a sigh. "If they're not hungry."
Then he raised his foot. "We should make them."
Pook! He kicked with all his might. The woman collapsed to the ground with a shriek.
Everyone opened their eyes wide. Sol Jihu discovered a palm-sized tattoo of a snake on the woman's neck and his lips formed a mocking sneer.
And he didn't stop with just one kick. Pook, 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 pook. He also kicked the 4 others in turn. The burly man took an especially hard beating. The hands that had strangled Seo Yuhui were kicked, stomped on, and beaten. The beating was so severe that even Audrey Basilar retreated with a cringe. It reminded her of what had happened to her in the past at the banquet.
Hey! Hey! Stop!
Finally, Cho-hong intervened.
You're going to kill them. Weren't you the one who wanted them alive?
We can heal them afterwards. Sol Ji-hoo remarked coldly as he pushed Cho-hong to the side.
Then he aimed as if he was kicking a soccer ball and gave the woman another kick.
That's right. Kill us.
The woman screamed, blood gushing from her nose and her mouth.
Kill us. We won't give in to you. Give in?
Sol Ji-hoo lowered his foot.
With a scoff, he slowly crouched beside the woman and looked into her eyes.
There must be a misunderstanding here. Level 6 Ghost Striker, Miss Kishi Yukino. The woman, Kishi Yukino, flinched, even though it shouldn't be surprising that the enemy knew her name.
All 5 of them were quite famous in Paradise, after all. What really shocked her and her comrades was what came after. Sol Ji-hoo began to recite their summoned date, sex, age, nationality, and even affiliation.
Because they had no way of knowing his innate ability, they were led to believe that he had thoroughly researched them beforehand. Don't flatter yourselves. We don't want to ask you any questions or squeeze information out of you.
We've already captured the bishop, so why would we? How? Let me repeat this one more time just to be clear. You have nothing to offer us. We're only keeping you alive to use as sacrifices. Keep your mouth shut and your head down if you want to die peacefully when everything's over. Sol Ji-hoo threw another punch at Kishi Yukino, who had been rendered speechless. He shook the blood off from his hand and foot before speaking. We're leaving soon. Bring them all and tie them to the back of the carriages. His cold voice made Cho-hong click her tongue. The roads are in bad shape. It'll take at least 10 days. It doesn't matter. They'll run if they want to live. Mr. Kazuki brought 2 carriages, so divide them into 2 groups. Okay. Un Yuri replied merrily. She untied the ropes from the tree and raised the homemade, black, leather whip in her hand. Let's go, everyone. Tilda. The 5 dogs squirmed with discomfort. Un Yuri flicked her arm and the whip slashed the young man, leaving a red line on his naked butt. Let's go, Tilda. This bitch. The burly man also vented his anger and Un Yuri whipped him as well. He clenched his teeth, his face buried in the damp soil and his butt aching from the lash. But these kinds of reactions seemed to excite Un Yuri even more. Her cheeks were flushed and her eyes sparkled. The slight curl at one corner of her mouth was another proof. Let's go, Tilda. Swish. The whip once again struck the young man's back and he clenched his teeth. In the end, the 5 were forced to walk on their hands and knees like vermin. Around the same time. When morning came, all the human territories in Paradise bustled with noise. Everyone who watched the shocking movie from the night before was talking about it. Father! Father! The same was true of Harem. Teresa looked for King Prehi as soon as she opened her eyes. Did you see it? Did you? I did. I could hardly sleep afterward. Prehi replied from his office, calmly tilting his teacup. How can you be so calm? I couldn't sleep a wink last night. Something has been bothering me. Earlier, I spoke with the executor of Avarice through the communication crystal. He said he was the director and that Valhalla's representative was the producer. Prehi set his cup down and tapped the desk with his finger. I just don't understand the purpose of their production. Purpose? They didn't have to broadcast it live everywhere, but they did. This makes me think they have a hidden motive. Prehi thought for a while before going on. I believe they were trying to gain justification for something. Justification? Yes. And if I'm right, we'll soon see the sequel. Prehi muttered to himself and stood up from the desk. Teresa looked puzzled. We should head to Eva. Prehi spoke. This plan of theirs is too over the top for the simple purpose of securing evidence. They must have a bigger picture in mind, and we might be able to help them paint it. We should head to Eva, and...
Prihi, who turned to face Teresa, paused in the middle of his sentence. His daughter was already dressed in her armor and even carrying a bag on her back.
She seemed ready to depart at any moment. When? Ooh-hoo-hoo-hoo. Teresa twisted and turned her body coyly. I packed early in the morning.
I told you I couldn't sleep.
Also, I wanted to see him badly. Prihi shook his head. I'll get ready right away. Sol Jihu kept true to his words.
Though he may be a kind leader to those inside his fence, he showed no sympathy to those who crossed the line. As a result, Kishi Yukino and the other captives had to run all day while tied to the carriages. The 1 or 2 people who tripped and fell were forcefully dragged along the ground until the carriages stopped. The saving grace was that the ground was soft from the rain that had fallen this past couple of days, but that didn't mean there was no force of friction or terrain features like the rocks and tree trunks. This naturally meant that the collapsed captives had to suffer through a burning pain while being dragged along the ground, screaming every time their skin scraped and tore. However, they became quiet once 6 or so days went by. The carriages came to a stop once the sun set on the 7th day. After eating dinner, the members of Valhalla discussed how to divide the stolen equipment under Sol Jihu's permission before falling asleep.
Sol Jihu also crawled into his sleeping bag but woke up after feeling someone shake his body. Un Yuri was turning her body left and right while yawning widely. It was time to change the night watch. Sol Jihu checked on the captives as soon as he started his shift. 2 of them were smeared in blood from head to toe.
Sol Jihu wasn't sure whether they had collapsed or died. The other 3 captives, who were covered in dust, looked fine in comparison, but they were still sprawled on the ground like dead frogs. While it seemed like he had nothing to worry about, Sol Jihu still checked their status windows with the 9 eyes. Only after confirming that their current condition was heavily injured or critically injured did he turn away. Sol Jihu stopped before he could even walk a few steps. A night watch usually had 2 people standing watch. The woman keeping watch with him was sitting next to the campfire.
Nuna?
It was Seo Yuhui. Curled up with her arms around her knees and her half-buried face staring dazedly at the campfire, she looked a bit pitiful. What had been worrying Sol Jihu the most during this return trip back weren't the captives or the future events, but Seo Yuhui. Though she tried hard to mask it, after finding out about Seo Yuhui's circumstances, Sol Jihu started to notice Seo Yuhui repressing herself or being tired. Her chronic illness had reignited from the recent event, and it seemed she was still in shock from the whole thing. It looks like being an apostle isn't so easy.
To be blunt, gluttony would only make one eat more. Sloth, avarice, and others didn't prevent one from living a normal life either.
But lust was different.
It heightened one's sexual drive, and the body would perceive intense gazes from one's surroundings as pleasure. I didn't think it would be this bad either. What Seo Yuhui said a week ago still lingered on his mind.
She wasn't normally like this, so Sol Jihu couldn't imagine how uncomfortable she must have felt to suddenly change after becoming an executor. At the same time, he developed a newfound admiration for her. It was said that the desires of the 7 sins would grow stronger as they built up without being relieved. He could tell just how powerful Seo Yuhui's willpower must have been to have held out without expressing the desire. Sol Jihu sighed.
He didn't feel good whenever he saw Seo Yuhui being in a daze. He wanted her to regain her smile. But words that were not followed by action were often meaningless. And so, he took out a pot and began to boil water. He cooked ramen with more care and attention than usual. Seo Yuhui, who was absorbed in thought, came to her senses when a tray was placed in front of her. A bowl of ramen, steaming deliciously and topped with a soft-boiled egg, a plate of well-aged kimchi, and a bowl of cold rice, namely, Sol Jihu's special ramen set, was ready. Her eyes widened. When she looked back with a surprised face, Sol Jihu smiled softly and gestured at the tray. "You surprised me."
Seo Yuhui seemed to be at a loss for what to do, looking a bit worried.
Geez, I'm going to get fat if I eat this late.
You can afford to gain some weight, Nuna.
No, it's not that. Whenever I eat, the fat all goes here. Seo Yuhui mumbled while propping up her breast slightly. I don't mind. Sol Jihu swallowed these words before uttering them.
After finding out about her secret, he was more careful with his words.
It wasn't as if he didn't understand her concern.
He could think of more than a few reasons on how having big breasts would be uncomfortable. Not only would they make one's shoulders stiff, but he had also seen Yu Sonhwa wanting to take a break after walking for a few hours from neck and back pain. And during that time of the month, they would grow bigger and demand a separate set of underwear, and tight clothes like button-ups would be too stifling to wear. Additionally, one would have to be mindful when they went down a staircase or eat something that could drip. Sweat would pool under or between the breasts during summer, and one might wake up in the middle of the night from the pressure. As Sol Jihu once lived together with Yu Sonhwa, he knew the pains of someone with big breasts.
If you're that worried, I'll just eat it. No, I didn't mean I won't eat. God, please forgive me for giving in to temptation. Seo Yuhui quickly picked up the chopsticks. Slurp. A satisfied smile bloomed on her face as the noodles went into her mouth. It's too good. Seo Yuhui was absorbed in eating for a while before feeling an odd gaze. Glancing up, she saw Sol Jihu staring at her with worry and concern. She could easily guess why he prepared this ramen for her. Sorry. When their eyes met, Sol Jihu spoke calmly. I didn't think they would go that far. He was talking about how the giant tore up Seo Yuhui's clothes at Kishi Yukino's command. It was an unexpected situation for sure. The entire situation was being broadcasted to every city in paradise, so it would be surprising if she was not shocked. Though he had no way of knowing for sure, given her personality, she must have felt greatly ashamed. Are you worried about me? Seo Yuhui made an odd expression. What should I do? Thousands of people must have seen me. What if I can't get married? You don't have to worry about that. Are you saying that because it's not your problem? Or are you going to take responsibility for this, Nuna? Realizing that Sol Jihu was worried about her, Seo Yuhui spoke jokingly. Yes, I'll take responsibility. HNNG, are you sure you're not just saying that? Who knows if you'll ignore me in the future? In the first place, I don't think a little skin being exposed is going to make you stay single forever. If anything, you'll have a lot more suitors. As Sol Jihu replied in a joking manner as well, Seo Yuhui pouted slightly. Sol Jihu chuckled before clearing his throat. Nuna, there's something I want to know. This was a good opportunity. Seo Yuhui seemed to be in a better mood. It was finally time to ask what he had been wondering for a few days. Once Seo Yuhui tilted her head slightly and nodded, Sol Jihu carefully brought up the topic he had been meaning to for days. To be honest, I didn't think you'd be hiding such a secret. But after thinking about it for a bit, I noticed something strange. You are the apostle of lust. I should have considered it at least once given my knowledge of executors, so why didn't I notice? Sol Jihu continued. It was probably because I didn't feel anything of the sort from how you treat me. From the moment we met until now. Indeed. Ever since she became an apostle, she had been extremely careful to the point of avoiding contact with others. With just one exception. For this person, she went as far as to move her place of residence to get closer, and she hugged him whenever she had the chance. Even when Sol Jihu snuck into her bed and buried himself in her chest, she would embrace him back and pat him rather than looking uncomfortable. Unless Seo Yuhui was faking it the whole time, he was clearly receiving special treatment. Feeling that Seo Yuhui must know what he was asking about, Sol Jihu patiently waited for her response. Seo Yuhui put down the bowl of ramen and lowered her head. She looked to be deep in thought. Then, she exhaled lightly and looked straight at Sol Jihu. You see, Jihu, I am curious about something too.
Can I ask just one thing?
Huh? Ah. Yes. What's the reason Luxuria Nim cherishes you so much?
Sol Jihu furrowed his brows.
He didn't expect her to suddenly bring up Luxuria's name.
Of course, the 7 gods can favor a particular earthling. But they are generally not interested in earthlings that serve another god because, in a way, that would be encroaching on another god's territory.
Seo Yuhui spoke softly. But Luxuria Nim
is very, very interested in you.
Almost to the point of being excessive. She mentions you a lot when she talks to me too.
Luxuria Nim talks about me?
Yep. But what's even more surprising is that Gyula Nim doesn't say anything.
Though I can't be sure, it's like she understands why and glosses over it, even though it would make sense for her to be displeased. So anyway, do you have any idea why Luxuria Nim adores you this much?
Sol Jihu was blinking in confusion for a while now. He looked completely lost.
It was true that Luxuria doted on him, but as far as he was aware, she was like that to all earthlings.
Wasn't that the reason Luxuria was so popular among earthlings, even being known as the kindest god? For a moment, an awkward silence filled the air. Seeing Sol Jihu's clueless face, Seo Yuhui smiled. In case you're wondering, I'm not saying that the answer to your question is because of Luxuria Nim. Of course, as her apostle, I can't deny her influence, but I know my feelings better than anyone else.
Seo Yuhui placed her hand on her chest.
It doesn't matter how people in paradise see and think of me. But what matters is that I'm ultimately in the same position as they are. I'm someone from Earth who entered paradise. Right. Exactly. So I'm not a saintess or an apostle. I'm just Seo Yuhui, a normal girl.
With that, Seo Yuhui cleared her throat. I don't think lust is a bad thing.
If I felt an aversion toward sexual desire, I wouldn't have accepted the position of an apostle in the first place.
Sol Jihu nodded his head and listened silently. Of course, it's hard and painful when my body reacts to people I don't like, especially people I despise and am disgusted by.
But Seo Yuhui trailed off as if she remembered someone. Then, she continued in a bright voice.
If I feel this way from a man I love, and if he and I can make love together, I think I couldn't be happier.
Seo Yuhui put her hands together and spoke calmly.
If it isn't from an artificial emotion that comes from me being an apostle, if it's something that my heart genuinely wants, then just holding hands would make me happy.
She then looked at Sol Jihu and smiled sweetly. No, it's made me happy. Really.
Her manner of speech changed from a hypothetical to an actual.
Meaning, she had already experienced it. Sol Jihu dazedly stared at Seo Yuhui before he noticed. What she said was simple. If it was someone she hated, she didn't want to even look at them.
But if it was someone she loved, even holding hands with him would make her heart flutter.
And that must mean one thing.
You're not going to say you don't get it even after I said all this, right?
Seo Yuhui looked away and giggled.
Sol Jihu's face turned red.
Ah. There's something I've been thinking about doing after going back to Eva.
After a brief silence, he spoke with a dry cough.
It's recruiting.
Recruiting?
Yes.
There's someone who helped wholeheartedly so that everything would go smoothly.
I see. Seo Yuhui's eyes widened at Sol Jihu's unexpected words.
However, she smiled at the next moment.
He had changed the subject naturally.
But she had somewhat expected this to happen.
Perhaps she should give him points for not saying, "Ha," and pretending not to have heard. Yes. Without this person's help, none of this would have been possible.
We might have suffered a huge loss too.
I see.
The problem is that she made this happen by putting herself in danger.
She even risked her life. However, Seo Yuhui soon realized that she was mistaken. Sol Jihu had not changed the subject or avoided giving an answer. So I decided to recruit her once and for all. I'm going to place her into Valhalla's main team and have her stay by my side.
What?
What for? Seo Yuhui was leaning forward unknowingly.
To make sure she never does anything like that again. That's it?
No. A lot of people are aiming for her. So I need to protect her, and also.
Also?
Ah. Sol Jihu smacked his lips at Seo Yuhui's incessant questioning. He then spoke calmly. If she wants.
Yes.
I can stay by her side forever and make her ramen whenever she wants.
Seo Yuhui's mouth slowly widened.
She was clearly taken aback.
Bewitching face, glamorous figure.
With her otherworldly appearance, Seo Yuhui had received countless confessions over her lifetime. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say she received hundreds.
But to say, I will keep you by my side and make ramen for you whenever you want. She had not heard such a clumsy, uncool confession since the time her university junior had said, Nuna, do you want to come to my place and eat ramen?
When she heard these words for the first time, she ceased all contact with the junior completely. But for some reason, so powerful. Even though what he said was no different than what that junior had said, the feeling she got from Sol Jihu's words was far too different. Looking at the bowl of ramen she pushed off to the side, the corner of her mouth curled up continuously. In the end, Seo Yuhui couldn't hold her laughter back and covered her mouth. Of course, she couldn't do anything about the laughter leaking out. Sol Jihu stared at Seo Yuhui as she giggled crazily. He had mustered up his courage to say what he just did. Not knowing what was so funny, he waited for her answer nervously. Yeah.
Soon, Seo Yuhui stopped giggling and spoke with a beaming smile.
I think that's a good idea too.
If she's as amazing as you say, then you need to hold on to her for sure. As she emphasized the words, for sure, her face flushed red like the setting sun being reflected on a river. You think so?
And my guess is that she won't say no. Seo Yuhui smiled gently while twisting her body.
Sol Jihu smiled brightly.
I'm relieved to hear you say that. I'll let Miss Baek Haiju know as soon as I get back. Seo Yuhui looked like she'd taken a blow. She glared at Sol Jihu, something she only did once in a blue moon. I'm kidding. You were laughing so much that I wanted to get back at you a bit, haha.
HMPH.
Mimi. What's wrong with laughing from joy? You almost made me sad. It's embarrassing. Ehu. You miser. Come here. Seo Yuhui tapped her thighs. Sol Jihu dragged his butt over and gently placed his head down. Though he was relieved to see her stroking his hair with her usual gentle expression, he still asked just in case. Are you okay? Yes, I'm fine. Even if I do this? Sol Jihu dug his face deeper between her thighs and rubbed it in a slightly risque place. Seo Yuhui's eyes narrowed. It's fine, but are you fine with it? Can you handle it? You'll take responsibility for this, Nuna, right? Saying so, Seo Yuhui stuck out her tongue and licked her upper lip. Sol Jihu winced. The pure saintess who served a god suddenly seemed like an enchantress whose peerless beauty was enough to cause the downfall of a country. Foo-foo. If you keep joking around, don't blame me for devouring you. Sol Jihu thought for a moment before nodding his head. MN. Being devoured by you doesn't seem like a bad idea. Oh. Is that what you're into? I don't have a preference. What about you? If I had to say, I guess I'm more into being devoured. You'll be surprised if you see my alias, traits, and level of cognition. Can you show them to me? No. It's too embarrassing. I'm going to die of shame if I show them to you. Seo Yuhui winked while smiling like a seductress. Sol Jihu immediately made a vow to pass Gyula's trial as soon as possible.
Though his 9 eyes couldn't see through Seo Yuhui's status window, there was a chance it might be able to once he became an executor.
After all, they would both be apostles then.
The moon is really pretty tonight, isn't it? Seo Yuhui regained her smile and looked up at the night sky with the dreamy eyes of a young maiden in love. Then, hearing the words, "You're prettier, Nuna," she lowered her head. "Oh, really?" Sol Jihu smiled bashfully.
Seo Yuhui smiled beamingly as well.
People often said that couples in their honeymoon period could spend all day just staring at each other.
And exchanging silent looks was enough to make smiles bloom on their faces. Ah! Seo Yuhui shook her head and lightly slapped Sol Jihu's cheeks in embarrassment. Sol Jihu grabbed her hand and carefully wrapped it around his face. Seo Yuhui lowered her upper body and quietly whispered something into his ears.
"Nuna, you're too lewd." "You don't like it?"
"No, I love it." The two of them broke out into giggles once again.
The giant, who woke up from the clamor, saw this scene and spat out blood. As his senses returned to his body, he grunted at the flooding pain.
A hot, heartwarming air flowed on one side, and a cold air flowed on the other. It was an extremely contrasting sight to behold. Asterisk.
As expected, the carriage arrived at its destination 4 days later. A huge crowd was gathered at Eva's gate.
"They're here. They're here. Over here."
Seeing 2 carriages making their way toward the city, more and more people started to come together from all directions. Then, they screamed.
It was because they saw the figures being dragged along by ropes tied to the carriages. 3 were walking staggeringly as if to collapse at any moment. 2 had already fallen and showed no signs of movement.
As their blood made a long trail on the road, the crowd that was running up to the carriages came to a sudden stop.
Using this opening, the carriages leisurely cut through the road. It wasn't until the carriages arrived at Valhalla's building that Sol Jihu showed himself. Once the carriage doors opened, people who followed them to the organization's building crowded around them. After seeing Sol Jihu, they threw one question after the other. Their reaction was slightly different than when he made his triumphant return from the Tigil Fortress War. A crowd had gathered back then too, but it was to reaffirm the news of the victory with their own eyes and celebrate. But this time, it was for a different reason. The recent incident was directly aiming at humanity. It wasn't that a huge result that would greatly influence humanity came out. Rather, it would be coming out soon. Because of one person. Though Sol Jihu was being bombarded with questions, he did not react strongly. What happened? Were there really traitors that were secretly communicating with the parasites? You've seen it with your own eyes. Is there a need to ask that question? Several organizations were behind the group that attacked Valhalla. What will you do about those organizations? What will we do? That's something for those organizations to investigate and explain. I don't believe it's Valhalla's turn to speak yet. Well, we have all the evidence in the world, so they better be prepared if they're going to say we plotted all this. Sol Jihu made his way through the crowd while replying calmly. It was then. Why did you broadcast the incident to the whole world? What is your intention? Hearing a certain question, he stopped before he entered the main gate. His intention for making the movie? Sol Jihu turned around. I will say just one thing. The crowd immediately turned silent. Those from intelligence organizations got ready to note his next sentence, word by word. The reason I broadcasted the incident to the whole world was to honor the memory of the deceased. To honor the memory of the deceased. The person who asked the question repeated Sol Jihu's answer in a daze. Yes. To honor the memory of raging temperance. It wasn't just him. The ones who were busily writing down Sol Jihu's words also doubted their ears and paused. What does that mean? Raging temperance is our enemy. But he was an outstanding army commander who is deserving of my utmost respect. That's right. This movie was made to honor the memory of the Parasite's 4th Army commander,
the great general raging temperance.
Kazuki dropped his head. Sol Jihu grinned at the people staring at him dumbfoundedly. Please include that in the news story so that the traitors can deliver it to the parasites. Sol Jihu then turned around and walked inside, all the while holding onto the quietly giggling Seo Yuhui's hand. Each and every member of Valhalla followed after the young man with light, cheerful steps.
You're back?
Sol Jihu could see Kim Hana waiting at the entrance once he opened the front door. I see that you threw a real bombshell. She looked at Sol Jihu and Seo Yuhui sticking together like pancakes and sent a subtle glance.
It looks like you made some progress. In what regard?
Kim Hana shrugged and then grabbed the clipboard under her arm. We can talk about Gina later. Anyways, you came back at the perfect time. There are two things I need to report to you. One is about Scheherazade, and the other is about an important guest from Harem. An important guest?
Oh, is Princess Teresa here?
Kim Hana shook her head. That too, but both reports are about something else. She then started speaking.
Same time. The parasite queen, who had been slumbering for a long time on the corrupted throne, suddenly opened her eyes. She had not recovered yet. Despite being asleep for close to a year, the cost of ignoring the law of causality and forcefully descending on Tigil Fortress had simply been too terrifying. To return to her past condition, she would have to rest at least a few months more.
There was one reason she opened her eyes. It was because she suddenly sensed a strange movement of the stars. In a half-conscious state, the parasite queen slowly opened her eyes and looked up.
After observing the outer space with a calm gaze.
Opening square bracket question mark closing square bracket.
Her brows suddenly wriggled violently.
And no. She didn't know exactly what happened during the time that she had been asleep. Insanity. But her eyes shot open after confirming the movement of the celestial bodies.
Shall we go to the office?
There are a few unwanted people listening in. Kim Hana threw a meaningful smile behind Sol Jihu.
One of the captives who met her gaze bit down on his lip.
François Delon.
He was a level 6 white swordsman from Area 2.
Most importantly, he was from Seinen, the organization that Kim Hana used to be a part of in the past.
How must he feel after meeting his past colleague as an enemy? Not in a battlefield, but as a captive, to boot.
Alright, we'll do that. Chohong, throw them all in the jail.
Sol Jihu readily agreed. You're talking about the underground prison under the royal palace, right?
Chohong snickered and dragged the captives away. Next, Sol Jihu entered his office and sat down behind his desk. I'll start with the news about Scheherazade. Kim Hana looked at her clipboard and started in a monotonous tone. While the video was playing, Valhalla's Team 1 raided the Temple of Luxuria's main branch and successfully captured Roberto Servillo. I heard you guys almost ran into a problem. Organizations within Scheherazade noticed the situation in the middle and rushed to the plaza. They tried to threaten the triads into stopping the screening of the movie, but they went back reluctantly after realizing that Miss Baek Haiju was there. Kim Hana cleared her throat. That small incident was resolved without a hiccup, but the problem happened elsewhere. Where? While a member of Team 1 was Rans, investigating the bishop's private storage, there was a slight holdup. Kim Hana corrected herself in the middle and cleared her throat. It must have been when the movie ended. While Team 1 was investigating the bishop's private storage, Scheherazade royal family supposedly sent their guards to the temple. And? Things might have gotten complicated if not for team leader Phi Sora's quick judgment. Kim Hana spoke clearly. As soon as team member Yi Sol-ah notified her of the guards' arrival, team leader Phi Sora changed the plan to joining up with the triads and leaving. The team swiftly left Scheherazade with the bishop. Sol Jihu sighed. Scheherazade royal family dispatched guards to the temple? Given their close relationship with Seinen,
they probably didn't have good intentions in doing so either. Since the royal families had jurisdiction over incidents that happened inside their cities, being delayed any longer might have made the matter more complicated.
Miss Maria is in Team 1, right? Sol Jihu smacked his lips.
Tell her to come see me later.
Understood.
Kim Hannah smiled bitterly. Anyway, what happened after that?
Team 1 safely brought the bishop to Eva and locked him in Eva's underground prison. The Scheherazade royal family naturally became a dog chasing after a butterfly.
But it seems they have no intention of giving up because they're supposedly sending an envoy to Eva.
I was told he would arrive tomorrow. First guards, and now an envoy. Sol Jihu tapped on the desk with his index finger. They should know what their action signifies.
Why do you think they're going so far? It's most likely to secure the bishop, who is the main culprit behind this incident. Because the bishop is related to Seinen, and Seinen is related to the Scheherazade royal family. So because Seinen can't afford to make a move, they're making the royal family move in their place? That seems likely.
Seinen's involvement in this incident is clear, so they're likely finding it difficult to move openly. Indeed, a member of Seinen was confirmed to have participated in this incident, and François Delon wasn't a simple, run-of-the-mill member either. To say that they knew nothing of this matter would be a stretch. Looks like they at least have some conscience left. Sol Jihu chuckled and gave a sarcastic remark. What will you do? As the capital of humanity, the Scheherazade royal family holds higher authority than the other royal families. Authority? Oh please.
Without Seinen backing them up, they wouldn't be able to say a thing. Sol Jihu snorted.
Let the envoy come. I'm curious what he has to say for himself.
Oh right, didn't you say we had guests from Harem? Sol Jihu waved his hand like the first problem wasn't anything important and then asked.
Yes, they must have set out a day after the movie. It's…
Hearing Kim Hannah's report, Sol Jihu's eyes widened. Really? Why are they here?
I don't know the details.
They just said they had an urgent matter.
An urgent matter? Where are they now? I guided them to Valhalla's dorm on their day of the visit.
They have been waiting for ages.
Should I bring them in?
Sol Jihu nodded. Kim Hannah bowed respectfully before turning around and leaving the office.
Asterisk.
It was an exciting film. The visitors were none other than the executives of Cecilia, Tatiana Cinzia and Claire Agnes. It reminded me of the time I went to see a movie with my boyfriend in an old, back-alley theater. It was quite memorable. It's hard to believe Miss Cinzia had a time like that.
Foo-foo. Everyone has a time when they're young and immature.
Anyway, B-grade movies have their own cheap charm.
Of course, people either hate it or love it.
But don't worry, I enjoyed it a lot. Cinzia sat with her legs crossed as she tied a knot with a red lace on her coat. Sol Jihu smiled quietly.
He knew Cinzia hated small talk.
Her admission that she enjoyed the movie was likely a way of telling him that she was intrigued in the matter and was fully supportive of Valhalla.
I'm glad to hear you liked it.
The folks over at Scheherazade seem to have found it boring though. The corner of Cinzia's mouth curled up. You can't do anything about their personal taste. Well, not that this movie is a simple matter of personal taste.
Anyway. She then crossed her arms and asked suggestively. I visited today, but I've been meaning to talk to you for some time.
Have you heard anything from Chung Cho-hong?
From Cho-hong? No. I asked her to deliver a message when she came over to give the enhancement stones. Ah.
Sol Jihu shut his eyes.
I'm sorry. Cho-hong must have forgotten about it. It's fine.
We would have called directly if it was something urgent. Cinzia raised her hand and continued in her unique, lethargic voice.
I'll cut to the chase. Cinzia did not speak in a roundabout way.
Something that is very important to Cecilia came up.
We looked into it ourselves, but we just couldn't figure out a way to resolve it. Okay.
But then we noticed how interesting things were getting and couldn't bear to sit still. From the sound of it, Chinzia seemed to have come to ask for help. Sol Jihu opened his eyes and looked straight at Chinzia and Agnes. A problem that even these two couldn't resolve?
He was already curious, but now he was dying to know.
What's the matter?
Do you remember the Tiggle Fortress War?
Ah, yes, thank you for your help back then. Don't get ahead of yourself. We're not here to ask for compensation.
What I want to talk about are the executors.
Executors. As soon as Chinzia mentioned this word, Sol Jihu's eyes sunk low. Before the Tiggle Fortress War, humanity had a total of 5 executors.
After the war, that number decreased to 4.
Sol Jihu nodded.
Originally, the only empty seats among the executors were the position of envy, invidia, and gluttony, Eula.
But with the Star of Pride, Superbia, being beheaded by Sung Shi-hyun's sword, the empty seats had increased to 3. Though I say that, there's no way to be certain how many seats are empty. The trial to become an apostle is something that the 7 gods bestow to individual earthlings. So long as their organizations remain quiet, there is no way for the public to know.
Meaning, it's entirely possible that new executors have been selected for both envy and gluttony. Chinzia continued slowly. I am bringing this up because I received news that Pride has recently selected a new apostle candidate. Sol Jihu's eyes lit up. The executor of Superbia.
May I know who it is?
Chinzia did not reply.
She only turned her head languidly and stared at the woman standing next to her. Sol Jihu, who followed her gaze, jolted. Agnes, who had remained quiet until now, slowly opened her eyes and looked back at Sol Jihu.
You mean?
That's right. As Sol Jihu asked half in doubt, Chinzia gave the affirmation. Claire Agnes.
She had been selected as the new executor to succeed the old Star of Pride. She's only a candidate though.
Sol Jihu almost shouted, "No way!" But after thinking about it carefully, he realized it wasn't that absurd.
She's hindered the parasites' plan on the front lines for several years now.
Not to mention, she became a level 7 for her contributions in the war 1 year ago.
Moreover, I don't believe there is a more excellent archer than Agnes anywhere in paradise. If you disagree, Agnes will be quite sad. Chinzia chuckled.
Though Agnes tried to look unfazed, she must have seen Sol Jihu's expression as she looked slightly sullen.
Sol Jihu quickly came to his senses and organized his thoughts. Looking back, Agnes had been involved in almost every incident surrounding the parasites. She didn't lose out to anyone in terms of strength either. Simply based on these 2 points, there was no reason to disqualify her. There was only one thing that bothered him. So Cecilia will have 2 executors. I thought so too and was happy at first.
The news came at a time when I was feeling bad about Agnes being stuck in a corner even though she constantly battles the parasites on the front line.
Chinzia rested her chin on the back of her hand and added flatly. I would have been happy, if not for the absurd trial that Superbia gave. I wouldn't be here complaining if they asked her to kill an army commander.
But that wasn't it.
When Agnes told me about the trial, I doubted my ears, wondering what it was supposed to mean. Chinzia stealthily glanced at Sol Jihu.
Last time I checked, a certain somebody in Eva was doing Agnes' trial for her. I can't guess what exactly he's planning, but that's what it looked like.
Sol Jihu's eyes widened.
That's why we put everything aside and rushed over. Because it seemed like my precious apostle candidate would get disqualified without doing anything.
Chinzia placed her interlocked hands on her knee.
So, do you have any plans to make a sequel?
If so, Cecilia would be more than happy to invest.
By any chance? Sol Jihu spoke calmly.
Was the content of this absurd trial to lead humanity's change?
At that moment, both Chinzia and Agnes widened their eyes. Though they expected Sol Jihu to guess the trial, They didn't think you would get it right without missing a single word.
Haha, what a coincidence.
Sol Jihu spoke with a faint smile.
I wasn't planning on telling you, but since you revealed an important piece of information, I will also reveal a piece of information of the same grade.
Of the same grade?
Yes.
Goddess Gyula has also selected an apostle candidate, and that candidate is a certain somebody in Eva.
Sol Jihu revealed his secret without reserve. Chinzia's brows twitched strongly. And the content of the trial that this candidate received is the same as the content of the trial that the Star of Pride candidate received. To lead humanity's change. The two women became dazed simultaneously. They looked like they'd taken a blow whilst unaware. But the blank stares only lasted a moment as Chinzia soon burst out laughing. Ah ha 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 ha. She laughed crazily before wiping the tears in her eyes and giggling.
Those damned gods. So they knew everything?
Looks like it.
Well, this is a surprise. I knew you'd get there eventually, but I didn't think it would be this quick. Getting the Apostles' trial at level 6.
Well, I suppose there's no rule forbidding it.
Hearing this, Sol Jihu gave a subtle smile.
It seems we need to talk a little more. Are you asking me out on a date? Great. I'm always happy to go on a stroll with a young lion. Chinzia shrugged and then winked. I'm free today anyway. Asterisk. It wasn't until sunset that Chinzia left the office. She exited the building alone and got on the carriage waiting in front of the building. Agnes did not leave with her. It was because Sol Jihu requested Agnes to spar with him once the talk finished. Chinzia agreed given that the master and disciple were meeting for the first time in a while. How much time went by? Chinzia, who was calmly organizing her thoughts, looked up at the sound of the carriage door opening. Agnes was climbing in with her usually neat hair in a mess. Her face was flushed red, her breathing was rough, and she looked rather distraught. Why? Did he call you Miss Teddy Bear again? Number. Looks like you gave him a rough beating though. Not at all. Agnes grunted as she sat down in front of Chinzia. Then, she spoke. It's the other way, actually. I was beaten up. What? I lost in terms of technique and suffered total defeat in terms of mana. I lost. Agnes huffed as if she was more than a little upset. Chinzia doubted her ears. Agnes, who could vie for first place after becoming a unique ranker, lost. In terms of technique too? Just when I thought I had him, the back of his spear suddenly struck my ribs. I managed to hit his face a beat later, but Representative Sol had lessened the impact by pulling his head back. I lost without any room for doubt. With that, Agnes bit her lower lip. I don't understand. She shook her head in confusion. It's only been a year. I don't understand what could have happened to change him so much. It was like I was fighting an old veteran. No, a monster, who came back from the brink of death in countless battlefields. Hearing this, Chinzia lowered her head slightly. Against a level 7 who still has the power of a servant. Was that why he smiled when I called him a level 6? She murmured quickly and then asked. What did Representative Sol say? He praised me. As expected of Miss Agnes, you're on a different level compared to those bastards in prison, he said. And then he added, I found a flaw thanks to you. Agnes took off her glasses angrily. Soon, the carriage slanted to one side before setting off slowly. Boss. After a long silence, Agnes collected her breath and spoke. If it's all right with you, I'd like to ask for some time off once we return to Harem. Denied. Chinzia replied right away. I understand how you're feeling, but you should know it too. Things will get very busy. This isn't the time to be absorbed in personal training. I didn't understand why Superbia was trying to back Cecilia, but I finally found out today. It wasn't us. Not only Pride, but the rest of the 7 sins are backing Valhalla. Superbia made her intention clear.
We will give you another executor, so stand by Valhalla's side and help them in their future endeavors."
Otherwise, it didn't make sense for the content of Agnes' trial to be a carbon copy of Sol Jihu's. People must be thinking,
There's no way.
that would be too much. But we're talking about an earthling who has always proven his doubters wrong.
Agnes listened silently.
Know this.
The man who fought the parasites 3 times and triumphed 3 times is now aiming his spear at humanity.
There is no telling what will happen from now on. Maybe. Chinzia trailed off and looked back. Although the wall of the carriage was blocking her view, she was looking in the direction of Eva.
This is just the continuation of the old Eva Alliance incident.
Only, it's a little bigger in scale.
If what Sol Jihu said was true, then not only the organizations that participated in the last incident but also the 80 or so organizations existing in Paradise would have to make one of the 2 decisions soon.
Either to grovel and submit, or be swept away completely. Of course, a small number of organizations would have another choice.
To stand by Valhalla and walk alongside him.
Like the Triads, Magicians Guild, and the Assassination Guild.
That was why Chinzia was in such a rush.
2 executors, a receiver of the divine vestige, and several powerful members. He. Chinzia grinned.
Every flow has its ebbs. All that's fair must fade.
It's about time to replace the throne.
From the carriage riding off from Eva's gate, a soundless laugh flowed out.
The next morning, Sol Jihu had breakfast made personally by Seo Yuhui for the first time in a long while.
Afterward, he drank coffee and picked up the newspaper that Kim Hana had brought him. Examining the Valhalla assault incident in full detail. Not long ago, a group of unidentified assailants attacked the members of Valhalla while they were traveling to find a cure for Seo Yuhui, the apostle of Luxuria. But they were met with fierce resistance. The identities of these assailants have now been confirmed, and a total of 24 organizations were found to have participated in the planning of the assault.
We have strong evidence against these organizations.
Should any of them deny their charges, Valhalla will take strong actions to seek justice, said Valhalla's representative, who arrived in Eva a few days ago. Valhalla has already issued a warning. The 24 organizations, including Seinen, have yet to publicly respond to Valhalla's accusations as, even now, we wait in anticipation for a response. Consequently, the remark made by Valhalla's representative regarding the 4th Army commander appears to be directed at the defectors of humanity, and may be intended to mock the parasites. Sol Jihu, who was reading the article out loud, smiled and handed the paper back to Kim Hana.
Great article.
They hit the bullseye, as expected.
Please thank Mr. Tong Chai for me. I will.
So what are we going to do from now on?
Kim Hana asked as she grabbed the paper from his hand. We're going to shake them. Sol Jihu replied, setting his cup on the table.
We'll bring in some more firewood and put it in one by one.
If they attempt to put the fire out, we'll pour over an entire barrel of oil. The words flowed naturally from his mouth as if he had already thought it through.
He seemed intent on building up the flames that were heating up all the human territories in Paradise. You sound like you know what they're going to do next.
Of course I do. Sol Jihu sneered.
You know what they say.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I've already experienced it once in Harem arc, I know their way.
But at least this time they won't be able to pretend as if nothing happened.
Sol Jihu opened his mouth wide and yawned as he looked up at Kim Hana. Well, doesn't the mere fact that they tried to capture the bishop give you an idea of what they were trying to do? Severing connections. It does happen all the time.
And it's quite a useful tactic.
Kim Hana agreed without putting up a fight.
Yeah, but thanks to Miss Phi Sora's hard work, that plan is now in tatters. We knew nothing about the assault, but a close investigation revealed that certain members of our organization were involved in the incident.
We deeply apologize and promise that this will never happen again.
That speech won't work anymore. It's good that we were able to capture him before they did, but I'm not sure he'll confess so easily. The bishop isn't stupid. Right now he's probably busy racking his brains trying to think of a way out of all this.
He'll probably attempt to minimize his role and blame his accomplice for what happened. That'll be fun to watch. I doubt it.
We have to get rid of them both anyway, so why would we watch them fight each other over who's less evil?
It's bad taste.
Sol Jihu snickered quietly.
Anyway, they must be very confused. It's a coalition of 24 organizations. I'm sure one or two will make mistakes. And when they do, we'll use those mistakes to fuel the fire. Is that what you meant by firewood earlier? I don't think it'll be easy.
Sol Jihu continued.
They'll do anything to stop the fire from growing.
That means what we need most right now is something that can keep them busy enough to prevent them from spying our every move.
Something to keep them busy.
Suddenly Kim Hannah came to a realization.
That's why. She wondered why he had so tenaciously tried to capture the 5 level 6s alive. The bishop alone was all evidence he needed. But now she understood. So it's important to get them to speak as soon as possible. Right.
How's the public reacting? They're angry. With us?
Or? Of course not.
They're angry with Sin-young and the other 23 organizations. Sol Jihu gave a smile of satisfaction.
Alright, so the public is on our side.
That was to be expected. Normally, public interest in this incident would have subsided quickly. But the situation changed when the parasites entered the scene and all witnessed that the defectors had joined hands with the parasites.
It was obvious what the Earthlings, who sought their own interests first, would think of the situation. Which means, it meant that Sol Jihu had considered the tendencies of Earthlings from as early as the planning stage. Good. This gives us enough justification. Kim Hannah trembled slightly.
He made it sound like Valhalla now had the justification to do whatever they wanted to their enemies. What is he planning to do?
Suddenly, Sol Jihu stood up.
This time, speed will be the key to our success.
I should get the bait ready before it's too late. Wait, didn't you say an envoy was coming from Scheherazade today?
Oh, that?
Kim Hannah smiled. I forgot to tell you. I received a call this morning.
A call?
Queen Charlotte Arya and King Prihi Hussey will be taking care of the envoy.
What? King Prihi is here?
Sol Jihu's eyes widened. Why didn't he come to Valhalla? I invited him, but he refused. He said he knew you were busy and didn't want to bother you.
He wants you to spend your time on more important matters. Yeah?
A smile flickered across the corner of Sol Jihu's lips. I feel more at ease knowing that he's helping us. There's one more thing he wanted me to tell you.
Kim Hannah cleared her throat and lowered her voice. Don't think it's just the Earthlings.
The smile faded from Sol Jihu's face. His eyes spun in a circle and then narrowed to a slit. Not just the Earthlings.
After a moment of contemplation, Sol Jihu glanced at Kim Hannah. Tell him I'll bear that in mind. His voice sounded solemn.
Asterisk.
At around the same time.
Absolute.
At the Eva Royal Palace.
Nonsense.
The envoy from Scheherazade, dressed in a fancy suit, looked around the room in confusion.
He turned his eyes to the left and then to the right.
The Queen of Eva snickered at him from her throne.
Next to her, the royal administrator glowered down at him with scornful eyes. And then he saw the Princess of Harem trying her best to suppress her laughter.
The general of Harem was playing with the sword at his waist.
None of them were on his side.
Finally, the envoy came to his senses and turned his gaze to the man who had just answered him. What did you just say? I said, absolute nonsense.
Prihi, the king of Harem remarked straightforwardly.
That's all you have to say to me, the official envoy of Scheherazade?
Was
that too rude?
Clearly, you've been spending too much time around Earthlings. You're starting to resemble them, both in speech and in manner."
The envoy shouted angrily at the king, who was now picking his ears.
Prihi reacted with a mocking sneer. "I won't deny that I've been spending time around Earthlings. But isn't the same true of your queen?"
"What do you mean?"
"I've heard that the queen of Scheherazade became Sinyoung's beloved pet."
Pet? The envoy's face stiffened.
Who knew she would turn out like that? Queen Ro used to be so bright and clever when she was young.
What a shame. Prihi clicked his tongue and shook his head. The envoy's neck reddened with angry heat.
"Will you take responsibility for what you just said?" Of course."
Prihi nodded without hesitation.
"In fact, I would like for you to deliver my message to her word for word." "I can't quite imagine how Ro Scheherazade would react, but what's the worst that could happen?"
"A war? What?"
Are those words really coming from the mouth of a king? Now, calm down. I'm only assuming the worst.
If Scheherazade wants war, then Harem is ready to give one. That was the point that I was trying to make. Prihi spoke with a playful smile.
There was not a trace of seriousness in his manner. It could only mean that he was toying with the envoy.
"I can't believe it.
This matter is between Scheherazade and Eva. Why on earth is Harem interfering in it?" The envoy clenched his teeth.
"Interfering? As far as I can tell, this is a just intervention. The representative of the organization affected by this incident is my son-in-law."
"Isn't that enough reason for Harem to intervene?"
Son-in-law?
Were you not aware?
The representative of Valhalla is my son-in-law. What kind of father-in-law would I be if I were to sit idly knowing that a member of my family has been hurt? The king's words came as unexpected, and the envoy unwittingly turned his gaze to the princess.
Teresa covered her pink cheeks with her hands and twisted her body coyly. "I was expecting Scheherazade's full cooperation, but instead you're busy trying to cover what happened. So of course, as a father-in-law, I'm upset."
"We're not trying to cover it up." After a brief pause, the envoy shouted again. "Bishop Servillo Roberto is a citizen of Scheherazade. The right to try and punish our citizens belongs to us. We're merely asking you to follow the law."
"The law?" Prihi stood with his hands behind his back and raised his chin. "It's a great thing.
But isn't it meaningless if you don't obey it at all times?" "What do you mean? You didn't seem very interested in enforcing the law when Earthlings who committed crimes in Scheherazade began to flood Harem.
That's. Or did Scheherazade pass a new bill that I haven't heard of yet?"
"Ignore the law when it's in our favor. Only enforce it when we're at a disadvantage."
"Something like that. Then I would understand." The envoy's mouth closed shut. "I only hope Scheherazade hasn't stooped so low." "Now go home, if you have nothing more to say,"
Prihi said with a sly smile. After minutes of angry silence, the envoy finally managed to speak.
"We will not forget what happened today. I told you, do as you want."
Prihi answered nonchalantly.
"I don't believe our soldiers, trained in the war against the parasites, will lose."
But Scheherazade has Sinyoung." The envoy tried to refute, but Prihi was quicker.
"Harem isn't walking on eggshells anymore.
We don't need Scheherazade's approval.
Also, I've heard that my son-in-law is a very powerful figure among Earthlings."
I wonder, why does my body feel so stiff?"
Prihi paused and began massaging his shoulders.
"Thanks to my son-in-law, I'm always holding my head up high these days, to the point where my neck and shoulders hurt."
"Would you care to join me for a massage?"
The king's sarcastic response angered the envoy and he began to breathe heavily through his nose. At the next moment, he spun his body around with great force, then stomped across the court towards the exit. "Thank you for your help." When the envoy disappeared from their sight, Charlotte Arya descended from the throne and bowed her head politely. The mocking smile was finally wiped off Prihi's face.
"Please, you shouldn't lower your head. You're a queen now. Ah, but
The truth is, I came here because I was worried. But I can see that you're doing well on your own.
all my worry was for nothing.
For that, I'm indebted to my talented administrator.
Sorg-kun gave a deep bow at the queen's acknowledgement. Thank you for helping me in getting rid of that envoy.
I'd like to invite you to a feast as a token of my gratitude.
Perhaps we should invite the representative of Valhalla as well.
No, that's all right.
Prihi shook his head. Speed is the key to success in this mission. Time waits for no one.
To maximize the effect, he must take the next step in the plan before public interest in this case disappears.
I'm sure the representative knows this, too.
It was a roundabout refusal. Charlotte, Arya and Teresa seemed visibly disappointed. Their plan to use Prihi as an excuse to see Sol Jihu seemed to have failed.
But I will have that lunch with you. Talking always makes me hungry. Prihi announced playfully and then began to chat with Sorg-kun. While the two of them talked, Teresa whispered in Charlotte Arya's ear.
Want to hang out with me tonight? I'm definitely going there. Charlotte Arya seemed tempted, but soon scratched her head with a troubled look. What should I do?
I have to go to bed early tonight.
Why? There's an important class one can't miss. A class?
Teresa's eyes widened. Asterisk. Sol Jihu left the Valhalla building that afternoon and headed for Eva's underground prison. It wasn't hard to locate the bishop.
He was locked in the very cell where Jung Sua had been previously locked up.
Clunk.
The guard opened the door and Sol Jihu quietly entered the cell. The bishop sat facing the wall in one corner of the cell. He must have heard the door open but didn't even look back.
It's been a while.
Sol Jihu approached the bishop and looked at his face. How have you been? There was no reply.
The bishop only stared at the wall. Suddenly, a small smile spread across his lips. I'll admit. It's been a long time since I've experienced this kind of failure.
You're incredible.
I applaud you.
The bishop spoke calmly before letting out a light chuckle.
I knocked on the stones, but it seems I wasn't careful enough. Sol Jihu's eyebrows slowly went up.
He seemed strangely tranquil for a man caught by an enemy.
You look calm.
Perhaps because I know what you want from me.
The bishop gave a wink.
Sol Jihu shrugged.
Hoo-hoo. Well then.
Now that things have come to this, there's no reason why I can't give it to you.
But in return,
The bishop spoke as if he was the one doing Sol Jihu a favor, but suddenly stopped.
Sol Jihu had raised his hand in front of the bishop's face.
That's okay. Pardon? I know you aren't going to tell me straight up. I know I can't persuade you with words and that you, being the great bishop that you are, don't give in to torture either.
Wait.
And even if you do tell me, that will be after you get what you want. Am I right? This time Sol Jihu gave a wink.
However,
his opponent's unexpected reaction left the bishop speechless.
Sol Jihu proceeded to grab the bishop by the collar and shook him. Hold on.
The bishop's facade of calm was now gone and panic filled his eyes. Why would I even waste my time?
Sol Jihu rummaged through his pockets.
You see, I have a much easier way to get what I want from you. He rubbed hard against the bishop's face with what he had taken out of his pocket. The bishop couldn't make sense of the situation, but he instinctively struggled.
UUP. UEP. Bishop. With a smile, Sol Jihu tightened his grip on the man's collar, yanking him.
Don't make this hard on both of us, okay?
Pook. Suddenly, a hard blow struck the bishop's head.
His consciousness began to fade and his vision began to darken.
Well then.
As he slowly fell, the last thing the bishop saw was,
have a nice dream. Sol Jihu's devilish smile. Asterisk. When the bishop opened his eyes again, he knew something was wrong.
Where am I?
He was in a cell just a moment ago.
But now he was standing in the middle of a garden, flower petals blowing in the wind. Mental magic has long been regarded as a forbidden form of magic. That wasn't the only thing that seemed wrong.
It is a mystical yet enormously complex study of the mind and the body, or more specifically the human soul and the human brain.
The faint voice almost sounded like it was singing. The bishop staggered to his feet, one hand grabbing his aching head.
Many different approaches have been explored. For example, touching the human brain directly, hypnotizing the subjects with illusion magic, or using drugs to control the nervous system. The bishop, barely standing upright, was speechless. Never mind the fact that he didn't know where he was. More importantly, these experimental efforts have not been futile. A girl with blonde hair braided in pigtails. We can now make an enemy spy confess classified information or our political rival admit to a crime he did not commit. Another girl with light brown hair. There was even a case in which an old foe became a new friend. And a woman with long black hair like ebony. Of course, these results are very difficult to achieve. You must pay extra attention to detail and precision when performing mental magic.
One small mistake could break your subject's mind.
In fact, that is what happens in most cases.
They were listening attentively to a girl in a black Gothic, Lolita-style dress holding a parasol.
The bishop and the girl's eyes met. He felt as if they were looking at him like they were looking at a lab rat.
But don't worry too much.
The girl glanced behind her and flicked her fingers.
The bishop, who had barely stood up, immediately fell to the ground again. An invisible rope tied him up and a mass of shapeless energy clogged his throat so that no sound could come out.
Do you remember what I said?
The goth lowly girl smiled as she watched the bishop repeatedly open and close his mouth in futile attempts to speak. Magic always starts with confidence. You should take failure into consideration, but don't let fear get the best of you.
Okay. The three girls replied in unison.
You girls are so adorable. Blown away by the cuteness of her students, the goth lowly girl turned around with a smile of satisfaction.
He said he'd soon send us 5 more subjects that we can break. You cuties can practice then.
Delphine and Charlotte will get 2 subjects each.
Yuri, I think you have a better understanding than those 2,
so you'll get only 1. Is that all right?
Yuri gave a small nod. Good.
Now then, I'll give you a demonstration before the rest of the subjects arrive.
The goth lowly girl strode with a dignified gait towards the bishop. I actually wanted to give this human to Yuri, but he says we're not supposed to break this one. Please understand. She twisted his neck from side to side, rolling up her sleeves. I need to do this perfectly to save my face in front of him and my students. She placed one hand above the subject. The bishop's lips trembled slightly as he felt a soft touch above his head.
I don't know how long he'll last, but focus. The joy in her sea-colored eyes quickly faded and her face now looked solemn. Don't try to see with your eyes.
Feel the flow of my mana and its movements. Her eyes glistened faintly, full of seriousness. The bishop's mouth slowly opened wide. It was as if a thin, stringy snake had penetrated his head and was stirring in his brain. This feeling intensified every second and became an agonizing pain. The bishop's eyes shot open.
They quickly went out of focus, veins of blood forking out over the whites of his eyes. His arms and legs became stiff. He began to twitch like a frog on the verge of death, and his mouth opened so wide that his skin almost tore. A silent scream burst from the fully open mouth.
Finally, when the bishop woke up from the long, seemingly endless nightmare. Ho! Sol Jihu was struck with awe. At last, the day of Valhalla's announcement was finally revealed. Coupled with the fact that Roberto Servillo and the captives were going to be placed as witnesses, as was revealed through the information newspaper of the Assassination Guild, the announcement received great public attention. Needless to say, Eva Central Plaza was jam-packed with so many people on the day of the announcement that there was no room to move around.
Soon, the crowd of people that gathered like clouds began to buzz.
It was because they had spotted Sol Jihu walking towards the square from afar.
That wasn't all. They had only guessed amongst themselves before, but the bishop and Kishi Yukino were really walking towards them under the escort of the Eva guards. Judging by the truths behind recently disclosed cases, most intelligence agencies had predicted that the bishop would become the scapegoat and take all the blame. The reason being that they had thought punishing all 24 organizations was realistically impossible no matter how strong of an organization Valhalla had independently become.
Also, unless the said organizations were idiots, there was no way they would admit to their deeds and most likely wave all accusations away, saying they didn't know.
Of course, a few thought the bishop wouldn't simply take things lying down and remarked that a dogfight would erupt between Luxuria's temple and the rest of the organizations. The Valhalla members started their announcement shortly after arriving at the center of the square. A moment later, Kishi Yukino and Roberto Servillo, whose eyes were blankly staring off into space, shakily stepped onto the platform that was prepared in advance. And the confessions that flowed out the two mouths shortly after surprised everyone present, putting them in a state of shock.
All the predictions made by intelligence agencies were completely off the mark. The person who schemed with us is Seinen Director of Human Resources, Jung Minjong.
The bishop didn't say things that they had expected.
Rather, it was an outrageous announcement, if any.
He admitted all of his crimes and testified the truth of the incident without a hint of falsehood. Whether it was their goal of wanting to prove their worths to the parasite queen, the accomplices that aided him in his plan that he crafted, and even the fact that they had delivered a communication crystal to the parasites to communicate with Sung Shi-hyun in case of any mishap, the bishop spilled it all. And when he mentioned that he and Seinen Director of Human Resources secretly contacted each of the organizations to gather their elite troops, the atmosphere in the square reached a climax. By the time the confession was almost over, Roberto Servillo and Kishi Yukino had started stuttering while sweat rolled off their bodies like rain.
Nobody thought it was weird considering the situation they were facing. Sol Jihu went up to the stage to send the two of them down before speaking in a low voice.
"I will now take questions."
The instant permission was given, questions poured out like a flood.
"What will happen to the bishop?"
"Since he kept his last strand of conscience, we will not kill him. We only see one captive, so what happened to the other four?"
Despite the fact that everything had come to light, there were some that upheld their loyalty even while knowing its consequences. In reality, their minds had been destroyed when Charlotte Aria and Adelette Delphine messed up during their practice, but Sol Jihu lied through his teeth without even wetting his lips.
The chaos only lasted for a moment. All 24 of the accused organizations are keeping silent. It seems like things will change after today's announcement, so what exactly are you planning to do?
The square instantly quieted after someone shouted. Though it was asked indirectly, it was a question that the crowd was the most curious about. Everyone had seen the evidence with their own eyes and the witnesses had come out.
With this, the organizations were incapable of pulling in or out at all.
We'll have to first hear what Senen's Director of Human Resources, Jung Minjong, has to say. Sol Jihu spoke in a monotonous, yet clear voice.
I'm sure that there are people that feel wronged.
There may be those that really didn't have a clue towards this incident since it was the actions of select individuals and organizations. Just like Kishi Yukino from the Japanese Business Federation, whom the bishop had personally called. Sol Jihu slowly looked over at the people who were listening while holding in their breaths, jotting down notes, or looking at his image through a communication crystal. But if anyone feels wronged, then they can simply prove their innocence.
However, we won't accept empty words.
After all, we don't know if people were really unaware or whether they chose to stay silent in spite of knowing everything.
He paused for a moment before suddenly lowering his voice.
However, those who are unable to prove their innocence or attempt to avoid their responsibilities shall be duly punished for their deeds.
The crowd started buzzing after the concise declaration. I'm not only talking about this incident.
Whether it's the ambush at Harem or the attempt to slander my reputation several years ago, we will be sure to pay back everyone involved with added interest."
Of course, he didn't forget to add a remark at the end.
"Here in paradise, we can't just leave the insects scheming in the dark alone, can we?"
Valhalla's announcement ended. Sol Jihu's official statement caused another ripple throughout paradise before it even recovered from the latest incident, and the intelligence agencies started to pump out masses of headlines. Roberto Servillo's shocking confession. I worked with Sin-young's director of human resources, Jung Minjong.
Accomplice revealed.
Valhalla's declaration of blood revenge. The Rubicon has been crossed.
Valhalla's representative will first listen to what Sin-young has to say. A chance to live? Valhalla's representative, prove your innocence. We don't believe in empty words.
Damn it. A man, who sat behind his desk reading an article, exploded in anger. He crumpled up the paper before throwing it at the young man who delivered it to him.
The innocent young man who was suddenly the victim of his outburst of anger glimpsed at the furious man, not knowing what to do.
Giovanni Greco.
He was a level 4 warrior and the representative of Il Destino, an armed force under Sicilia that had made an enemy in Harem.
He was also someone involved in the recent incident.
Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Damn it!
Giovanni Greco pounded his desk and cried out in anger again and again. Not only did his plans fail, but he had lost his group's sole high ranker. To top that, he was facing all sorts of accusations from the public. Accusations were only temporary, so he could just endure them. The problem was that Valhalla was constantly enlarging the issue. Because they were fanning the fire before the previous commotion died down, things didn't look like they would quiet down soon. By this point in time, he began worrying whether the flames would burn down the entire house. This was evident by the few members who had already started quitting his group under the pretext of this incident. Of course, with all things considered, including the old Eva Alliance incident, everyone knew that they were pulling out solely from the fear of Valhalla's spear. That damned bastard! We would have taken a step back if he had done things moderately, but does he want to take this to the end? Giovanni Greco ground his teeth before suddenly raising his gaze. The young man flinched, sensing his stare. Is there still no call from Sin-young? Yes. They seem to be in the middle of their daily conference. They told us to wait for now. Isn't their HR director an accomplice? Then shouldn't they weave some new story or state their defense? If not, then fuck. Are they saying they have another tail to cut? The young man smacked his lips. Like Giovanni Greco said, the mastermind that planned and directed the whole incident was staying silent. Of course, while they could be coming up with countermeasures to respond to the difficult situation they were in, it was a fact that things couldn't be left alone. There was no way Valhalla would accept just Sin-young's director of human resources as the sole scapegoat. It was possible that Sin-young was looking for another scapegoat to satisfy Valhalla to solve this incident, and no one knew which organization it would end up being. To put it flat out, it wasn't once or twice that such things happened in paradise. The young man, who hesitated for a while, spoke up. Why don't we make the first move since things ended up like this anyway? First move? Yes. Since we're in a rather unique position. He was inferring the fact that Il Destino was technically under Sicilia, not Sin-young, at least on the surface. Continue. Realizing this point, Giovanni Greco spoke in a slightly calmer voice. A moment later, when the young man's explanation was over, he made a doubtful face. Well, it doesn't sound too bad, but can we do this? We won't be denouncing Valhalla, so wouldn't this much be fine? In any case, we should be digging a way to survive, shouldn't we? To put it bluntly, if Sin-young. The young man trailed off his words, but Giovanni Greco could guess what he meant. If Sin-young is attempting to find a sacrificial lamb, it is highly likely that we will become their first target. Then again, considering the size of Il Destino,
It wasn't unreasonable to worry about things that might happen on the off chance.
Damn it. Crossing the line when choosing sides might fuck us over.
Weren't we already picking a side? It's not a bad idea to completely board one side this time.
The young man suggested one more time. Giovanni Greco was conflicted for a while before he ended up nodding with difficulty.
Make sure you write up a damn fine article.
Asterisk. 2 days after Valhalla's official announcement, one of the 24 organizations that participated in the raid stepped out to state their story for the first time. An organization called Il Destino from Harem had independently published an article. Giovanni Greco cleared up their position as follows. He was not aware of the recent happenings and that it was the independent action of Mattia Moretti, whose identity was confirmed among the dead. They complained that it was unfair, describing how Il Destino was a force under Sicilia in the first place, so they couldn't be related to Seinen or luxurious temple at all, and insisted that Mattia Moretti had taken independent actions. While Giovanni Greco admitted that 100 apologies weren't enough for the mismanagement of his subordinate, he cautiously questioned whether the bishop was trying to drag others down with him. With the publication of the article, the die was cast. As the saying went, a guilty conscience needs no accuser. While he had carelessly thrown out the article out of sheer desperation, Giovanni Greco paid keen attention to Valhalla's response. While he was waiting, an unexpected guest visited Il Destino. Upon hearing the notice, Giovanni Greco hurriedly ran to the reception room. "Just what do you mean by this?" This was what he heard as soon as he opened the door. He saw the back of a woman draped in a red coat, sitting on a chair. It was none other than the head of Sicilia, Tassiana Cinzia. How may I help you?" Don Cinzia. About this incident. Giovanni Greco and the young man panicked. "No, I'm not talking about that incident." Cinzia lowered one of her arms without looking back at them. A piece of paper slipped out between her index and middle finger before landing in front of Giovanni Greco's foot. "This. I'm talking about this. It was the article published by Il Destino. Actually, you did well. It was rather timely." As Cinzia's voice continued, Giovanni Greco, who was initially at a loss, had his complexion grow a little brighter. Was she praising my quick response? Just as he thought so and was about to let out a relieved sigh. It seems Representative Sol's predictions were completely spot on. He said that there would be a group or two that would jump out to take advantage of the chaos. Giovanni Greco, who had sat himself down across from her, froze. He didn't understand what she was saying at that instant. "I've never imagined that it would be from Harem though," Cinzia unpleasantly remarked while biting on a cigarette. "In any case, perhaps I should thank you for creating an excuse for me to get involved. It was quite an interesting article to read, but Sicilia can't let go of this opportunity." "That? What do you mean? You've seen the movie a few days ago, haven't you?" "Movie? Are you talking about that film?" Cinzia smirked as Giovanni Greco asked with a dazed face. "Yes. That movie. There will be a sequel to it soon. But the film director, who also happens to be the male lead, mentioned he had a few worries." "Yes. The first movie might have been a success, but there are often cases where the sequel doesn't meet the audience's expectations. Perhaps that's why he's thinking so hard about the opening sequence." Cinzia furtively glanced over. Giovanni Greco still had a face that said he had no clue what she was saying. "What I mean is," Cinzia slowly explained while she lit her cigarette, "a certain organization took advantage of Sicilia's friendly relations with Valhalla's previous identity, Carpe Diem, to craft an explanation. What do you think of using the destruction of that organization as the opening sequence?" "A certain organization?" "Yep. A certain organization." Cinzia raised her eyebrows and lightly nodded. "For example, that certain organization seemed to be affiliated under Sicilia on the surface, but in fact, they were allied with Seinen and were secretly spying for them. It would be quite the scene if Sicilia flew into a rage and blew up that organization.
What do you think?
Giovanni Greco blinked his eyes. What are you?
Just as he widened his eyes and slammed the table with both hands to stand up from his seat.
Crash! Ack!
He screamed out loud together with the sound of glass shattering before slumping back down in his seat.
An arrow was seen sticking out the back of Giovanni Greco's hand.
The young man who had entered the room with him also cried out in pain before landing on the floor. A glint could be seen on the rooftop of a distant building in the direction of the broken window.
It wasn't only there. Front, back, left, and right. Through all the windows around them, they could see something flashing under the sunlight off in the distance. They were completely surrounded. What do you mean by? Ah!
Giovanni Greco screamed in pain in the middle of his sentence. Cinzia had gripped the arrow shaft and was driving it deeper into his hand. Did Seinen order you?
Cinzia leaned forward to ask. No, that's not it. Seinen wouldn't be that stupid. I'm guessing that you felt guilty about something and wanted to make the first move.
Giovanni Greco madly shook his head while clenching his teeth. But Cinzia ignored him and instead, leaned her face closer. Whatever the case was, actually, I don't really care what you're thinking.
Cinzia's eyes glinted. What's important right now is that we need a sacrifice.
A sacrifice, to show as an example of what happens when someone incurs the wrath of Valhalla. As Cinzia quietly spoke at a distance where their noses were almost touching, Giovanni Greco began visibly trembling. He started regretting everything. He had spilled water to douse the fire, but it turned out to be a cup full of gasoline instead of water.
He won't believe empty words and will be sure to pay back everyone involved with added interest.
Since Valhalla's representative had put it so clearly, our actions will be justified.
As an irreplaceable ally of Valhalla, of course. White smoke puffed out of Cinzia's mouth.
Giovanni Greco, who was scrunching his eyes because of the smoke, suddenly squinted. Bright light entered his vision.
When he subconsciously looked down, he found a magic circle emitting a pale purple light underneath him and the young man. Giovanni Greco's mouth fell open. Adios, amigo.
At the same time that Cinzia bid them farewell, Valkyries dashed out of the magic circles to pierce the throats of the two men with their spears. The two convulsed together while impaled on the wall. And once they vomited blood and their bodies went limp, Cinzia activated her teleportation magic without any hesitation. When she appeared outside, she found Agnes stretching out her arms wide toward Il Destino's building. Cinzia passed her without saying anything. Boss? She only gave a wave at Agnes' question, as if telling her to take care of it herself before it got bothersome. Receiving the signal, Agnes circulated her mana and firmly pressed down with her hands without a hint of hesitation. As she did so, hundreds of thousands of invisible wires that had wrapped around the building dug into the walls and sliced through them.
A moment later, the building was cut through like a cake sliced into pieces before sliding down. Rumble. Quang, 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 quang.
Accompanied by a loud rumbling, the structure fell apart like a sandcastle.
It didn't take long before the enormous building completely collapsed. It was a display of force, befitting a unique rancor. The only thing left was to clean up the remnants. Under Agnes' command, the Sicilia members who had been waiting, all charged towards the collapsed building. Flames with columns of black smoke soon engulfed everything. How is it, Valhalla's representative? Cinzia spoke as she observed the scene from afar. It's our gift for our previous meeting.
Do you like it? It's great. A low voice was heard through the transparent crystal that was emitting a faint light in Cinzia's hand.
I just finished reading the article actually. I was preparing to take action, but you saved me the trouble.
But Miss Agnes seems a little too angry, doesn't she? There's the saying, like teacher like student, but Agnes has always had quite a competitive spirit.
She hasn't been able to sleep properly ever since we've returned.
Cinzia lightly laughed. You know?
She drew the communication crystal closer before subtly asking.
If we had taken action after the incident 3 years ago like we did today, do you think we could have been a little closer?
I've always considered us as close, but a little more than that, huh?
Well then, can't we get to know each other starting now?
There's the saying that something well begun is half done. Anyways, I've received your gift well. Well begun is half done, huh?
I'll need to put in effort to know your other half then.
You have to prepare yourself well in that case. There's nothing too hard if there are benefits coming and going. I look forward to working with you, my new amigo.
Shinzia gave a big smile as if she found Sol Jihu's response satisfactory. That day, a great fire blazed up in Harem. By the time people noticed and came running, everything was already over. The building that had once been Il Destino's turf vanished without a trace.
All that remained was ash. Clang!
A small spoon dropped to the floor from Yun Xiaohui's hand. However, picking it up did not even cross her mind as she asked dazedly. "What did you say?" Haramark's Il Destino was wiped out by Sicilia. Every member including Giovanni Greco was killed. The HR director cupped his hands together and bowed. Yun Xiaohui bit her lower lip. Among organizations that had control over Haramark, Il Destino was the organization that responded most favorably to Sinyang's call. Did they find out?
No, it was unlikely that they found out.
The order of events was clear.
Il Destino had announced where they stood on the recent incident, and Valhalla had only moved as per their declaration from a few days ago. It was just that Cecilia carried out Valhalla's will. And therein lay the problem. Yun Xiaohui would have much preferred Valhalla finding out about Il Destino's involvement. Cecilia's action, in this current situation, was no different than openly supporting Valhalla. Of course, the public might criticize them for being too harsh.
But the South's Warhawks was not an organization that cared about the public's opinion, and they probably wouldn't receive much criticism anyway. After all, the public was standing by Valhalla's side, and Cecilia had joined them. Yun Xiaohui nibbled on her lip for some time. After silently thinking for a while, she opened her eyes. After organizing the scattered documents on her desk with a calm expression, she got up. "I'll be taking my leave now.
I have a meeting to attend." "A meeting?"
The HR director, Jung Minjung, blinked.
"You should have told me earlier." "Ah, it's fine.
I didn't tell you on purpose." Jung Minjung flinched.
"You must be exhausted, right? You look very stressed."
As he slowly raised his head, he saw a sweetly smiling Yun Xiaohui. Her concerned expression was nowhere to be seen as she showed off her usual, artificial smile.
"I believe in you, Director Jung."
Jung Minjung was strongly denying the allegation made against him, and Yun Xiaohui had just said she believed him. But she wasn't telling him about her schedule despite always having done so before, and she wasn't allowing him to join the meeting where he would be talked about without a doubt. How was he to interpret this? For
some reason, Kim Hana crossed his mind. "Rest well."
Yun Xiaohui smiled with a slight bow before leaving the room with light steps. Jung Minjung stood in the same spot for a long time and dazedly stared at the door Yun Xiaohui left open.
The destruction of Il Destino.
The news of this incident struck all regions of humanity hard. What was even more shocking was the fact that it was Cecilia, and not Valhalla, that carried this out.
But this incident was only the beginning.
Valhalla finally stepped up to the plate.
"Are you really going to do this?" Park Dungchun, the head of Dungchun Merchants, expressed his frustration with a sigh.
"Come on, bud. What are you so worried about? I, Park Dungchun, am here for you. We've known each other for how many years now?"
"I'm here to save your ass."
A skinny, ponytail-haired man, who contrasted Park Dungchun's chubby figure, furrowed his brows. He was staring at a piece of paper in front of him with hesitation written all over his face. His name was Vahid Hosseini. He was from Area 5 and the representative of a large merchant group that had a firm grip on Noor.
Meaning, he was a bit of a celebrity within Noor.
Hosseini, I know how you feel. But you know about the old Eva Alliance incident, right?
What do you think was the cause of that? It was the illegal slave hunt. And at the time, I was actually caught red-handed by Valhalla's representative.
Vahid Hosseini looked up slightly. Back then, I thought I was done for.
I'd captured a Foxman kid and was chasing another one that escaped when some demon suddenly looked at me with the runaway Foxman in hand.
What do
you think this Park Dungchun did? I handed over the Foxman in my possession, apologized, and swore I'd never do it again.
And?
What do you mean, and?
Can't you see I'm alive and well?
Heck, I'm not just alive. I'm thriving in Eva right now.
Seeing that Vahid Hosseini was showing interest, Park Dungchun pounded his chest and spoke even more passionately. You must think Valhalla's representative is some kind of monster, but you couldn't be any more wrong.
Sir Soul is a human being too. He isn't some inflexible fart. Just trust me. I'll make sure to help you and your organization get out of this intact. Just close your eyes and sign here. Persuade your men to sign it too.
Park Dungchun tapped the paper on the desk. Vahid Hosseini smacked his lips and looked down at the paper, which was none other than a contract. To be more precise, it was a contract from Valhalla that was imbued with the power of a god.
Though it was complicated, it could be summarized as follows.
1. Those who sign the contract shall not collude with the parasites and not do anything against the interest of humanity.
2.
In the case that a war against the parasites breaks out, those who sign the contract shall spare no effort to help humanity. This contract, written by Philip Muller, was the simplest, most effective way to prove the remaining 23 organizations' innocence and to control them. Earthlings that go against the terms of the contract would be barred from entering paradise ever again at best, and be executed at worst. It was a clean, surefire way of dealing with potential traitors, but Sol Jihu argued with Philip Muller all night regarding this issue. Sol Jihu was of the mindset that every rat should be exterminated, while Philip Muller suggested leaving a way out in consideration of the large gap that might be created within humanity's camp.
You're driving me nuts. Do you think you're hegemon King Shang Yu, exterminating all your enemies?
Having no choice but to fight his own country, he led his army to Xianyang, killing even those who surrendered without mercy. As a result of this insane so-called March of Death, the people of his country resisted desperately, knowing they would die regardless. My point is this. What are you going to do if the people who become your targets say, "Screw it," and escape to the parasites' camp?
Do you think the parasite queen will stay there after finding out about this?
Sol Jihu had not forgotten Philip Muller's warning. So immediately after the fake Gorad Boga incident, he changed his mind to give the would-be traitors one last chance.
And so, he made an example out of Il Destino and sent envoys to the other organizations.
To be honest, Sol Jihu did not expect a third of all organizations in Paradise would have participated in this latest incident. After finding out, he couldn't help but agree that Philip Muller's suggestion to reform the existing forces through contracts was better than his idea of destroying all the organizations that were involved and raising new Earthling recruits. Of course, he would only give this opportunity to those who did not collude with the parasites, and it would be up to the organizations to decide whether to accept this offer or not. If they refused, Philip Muller said he would not deter him then.
I get what you're saying.
Vahid Hosseini groaned after deep contemplation. But these terms are just too.
Hey. Are you really saying that? Park Dungchun cut him off before he could even finish his thought.
He then glanced at his old friend suspiciously. Don't tell me, you're really colluding with the parasites?
Of course not.
Vahid Hosseini jumped with anger.
I'm innocent. I didn't know the bishop was a traitor. Then just sign it. Park Dungchun jumped with anger as well.
This contract isn't even asking for much.
Is it telling you to give up your life?
Is it telling you to disband your organization?
No.
It's saying, "We'll forgive you and let you keep your organization intact, so help us fight the parasites as fellow Earthlings." Park Dong-chun slammed the desk in frustration.
Plus, let's get this straight. Even if he participated independently without your knowledge, he was still your subordinate.
Not to mention, he was the ace of your organization. A direct subordinate.
To put it bluntly, let's say I tried to stab you with a knife. If I say, I didn't mean to but my hand moved on its own, would you say, "Oh okay," and move on? And no.
A representative needs to take responsibility. Think long and hard about this.
Right now, you're the offender. No matter how many times you scream that you're a victim, no one will believe you. They'll only see you as a liar.
Vahid Hosseini shut his mouth. He knew Park Dong-chun was right. After quietly sighing for a long time, he slowly placed his hand on the contract. "I just have to sign this thing?"
Hey. Park Dong-chun's expression softened a bit. "First, you sign the contract.
Then, you go to Valhalla and apologize personally, and maybe even include a little token of gratitude."
He then coughed. "Kuum. You should also mention Sinyoung in your public statement."
"That's the least you can do." Vahid Hosseini flinched once he heard Sinyoung's name. Seeing him hesitate again, Park Dong-chun clicked his tongue.
"Ehu. Looks like you've gotten old since the last time I've seen you."
Being so worried,
he cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Alright, I'm going to let you in on a secret. Listen up.
I know what you're worried about, but you have no reason to be worried." "What do you mean?"
"What do I mean?
I mean that things are going to change."
"Come here." "Ah. Okay.
You remember the Tigil Fortress War from a year ago, right?
When that war ended, Valhalla's representative and the Federation's upper echelon had a little talk."
Park Dong-chun whispered with his voice lowered, and by the time he finished talking, Vahid Hosseini's eyes were wide open. "Is that true?"
"Of course."
"You're not lying?" "Why would I lie?"
Park Dong-chun snorted.
"You know when Valhalla's representative was gone for a long time?"
"I was contacted by the Eva royal family and started preparing in secret."
"Come visit if it's so hard to believe."
"I'll show you." If you say so."
"Also, I wasn't supposed to say this to anyone, but I made a special exception for you.
So I'll know it's you if any rumor about this matter spreads. Our relationship will be over, friend or not." I know. My lips are sealed. You know that I'm tight-lipped."
As Park Dong-chun gave an ultimatum, Vahid Hosseini let out the breath he had been holding in.
"Anyway, if what you're telling me is true." He then opened his desk drawer and took out a pen. With only a slight second of hesitation, Vahid Hosseini signed his name on the contract. *. Japan Business Federation. It was an economic organization that held a sizable force inside Paradise.
As one could easily guess from their name, most of their members were Japanese, and it was also the organization that Kazuki's Umi Sabama worked under in the past. Today, Kazuki was visiting the Japan Business Federation with Un Yuri. Kim Hana had suggested that he tie up loose ends from the past.
Team leader Kazuki, I know your relationship with the Japan Business Federation isn't particularly good.
Why don't you give them a visit?
Representative Sol gave his approval. If you accept, you would be going as the representative's direct agent. For this matter, of course.
Just like she said, Kazuki did not have a good relationship with the Japan Business Federation.
In fact, it could even be called terrible.
As the Japan Business Federation valued command and discipline, they disbanded Umi Sabama when Kazuki disobeyed their order to not participate in the Delphinion Laboratory rescue mission. Afterward, they hindered Kazuki's effort to create a new team, thus worsening their relationship to an irreconcilable level.
In the end, Kazuki could not endure the Japan Business Federation's interference and joined Valhalla.
Several years had passed since then, and now they were meeting again with their roles completely reversed.
On the wooden floor of a large waiting room, dozens of people were sitting upright in 2 lines.
And on a small platform in front of them, a beautiful woman was lying down and glancing up at the guests who had come to visit them. Languid, slightly curved eyes and neatly closed lips, straight hair with bangs that were cut in a single line, and a loose crimson yukata that fit like a blanket. This doll-like beauty was none other than the head of the Japan Business Federation, Tsuji Yuki. She stared at Kazuki with sleepy, half-closed eyes before slowly saying, "Valhalla's representative. He did not come." Kazuki spoke clearly.
"He is very busy at the moment.
But you don't need to worry.
I am here in Representative Soul's place." Tsuji Yuki's lips turned crooked. She brought a long smoking pipe to her mouth and then looked down while resting her chin on the back of her hand. In front of her was a piece of paper that Kazuki delivered. It was a contract that was sent by Valhalla.
"I have a question,"
Tsuji Yuki asked while reading the provisions in the contract.
"Did other organizations get the same contract?"
"No, they aren't exactly the same." Kazuki shook his head. An extra clause was added to the one drawn out for the Japan Business Federation. It's the first provision, as you can see.
Kishi Yukino, who is suspected to be one of the traitors along with the bishop, is from the Japan Business Federation after all. Did Kishi Yukino not confess everything?
I'm not sure. I don't know all the details regarding that matter.
Kazuki easily avoided Tsuji Yuki's attempt to probe for more information. Tsuji Yuki smirked and then spoke. "If I remember correctly, an organization that is in the same city as we are refused Valhalla's offer just yesterday." "That's right. Hanoi refused Valhalla's offer. But that was Hanoi's decision.
Noor's Arabia Merchant Group accepted Valhalla's offer."
Kazuki continued calmly.
"What decision other organizations came to is not of my concern. I am here to ask for the Japan Business Federation's decision. Chairman Tsuji Yuki, as their representative, what is your decision on the matter?"
Tsuji Yuki did not answer. Setting aside the other provisions, the first provision was more shameful and humiliating than an instrument of surrender. She really had to sign such a thing?
It was then.
As Tsuji Yuki's expression contorted, the tightly shut door of the waiting room burst open.
A man wearing a kimono rushed in and approached Tsuji Yuki.
"What's the matter?"
Sorry, Chairman. It's just."
As Tsuji Yuki asked sharply, the man sweated profusely and whispered into her ears. Soon, Tsuji Yuki's eyes widened. "What?"
I went and confirmed it with my own eyes. The place was completely razed to the ground. Hanoi has been destroyed by Valhalla. Tsuji Yuki turned her gaze with a surprised look.
Kazuki was still looking at her with leisure.
"Huh."
Tsuji Yuki let out a chuckle.
She had been wondering why Hanoi was left standing even after a day had gone by since their refusal. So it was for this. She felt like she understood how Xi Jinping must have felt when he was told of America bombing Syria in the middle of his summit meeting with Trump.
"Let me ask you again." Kazuki spoke. "Do you accept or refuse?" After a short moment of silence, Tsuji Yuki sighed deeply and put down her smoking pipe. She had been hesitating, but now the scale had suddenly sunk to one side. Once she refused, Kazuki would leave this place and return with his comrades in less than a day. Though unfortunate, the current Japan Business Federation had no way of stopping Valhalla.
So this is the type of man Representative Soul is. Tsuji Yuki smiled bitterly and slowly raised her upper body. "It wouldn't have been as bad if he had come personally to ask, but to ask me to show my body in front of my old subordinate. I see he has a rather unusual taste." After lamenting briefly, Tsuji Yuki got on her knees and bowed waist down. "I apologize." An apology came out of Tsuji Yuki's mouth. She put her hands on the floor and bowed until her forehead touched the ground. On the other hand, Kazuki's chin slowly went up.
Kishi Yukino being a member of the Japan Business Federation is an undeniable truth, and the fault of my subordinate is also my own.
As the representative of the Japan Business Federation, I sincerely apologize to Valhalla's representative for causing him the worry.
The Japan Business Federation gave in. The executives that were sitting behind her were all staring at Tsuji Yuki with distressed faces.
I am incredibly ashamed of my subordinate's actions, and I beg for forgiveness from all who have been hurt by this incident.
The Japan Business Federation will accept Valhalla's offer and carry out the contract's provisions wholeheartedly.
Tsuji Yuki released the breath she had been holding in.
And, the executives of the Japan Business Federation, myself included, will take the initiative and set an example by carrying out the first provision.
Speaking with a trembling voice, Tsuji Yuki slowly got up.
Immediately, the yukata that was loosely hanging on her shoulders rolled down.
She must not have been wearing anything inside as her bare, smooth body was revealed in full. Tsuji Yuki shut her eyes, spread her legs slightly, and raised her hands up high. It was like she was going through an airport body scanner. Kazuki nodded his head and then looked around the room.
Then, with slight differences in timing, the silently sitting executives slowly got up and began to take off their kimonos. After fully undressing, they posed in the same manner as Tsuji Yuki.
I understand that Chairman Tsuji Yuki is meaning well. Only now did Kazuki get up.
Then excuse me. He then turned around and spoke to Un Yuri, who was struggling to hold back her laughter. Don't laugh.
This is an important matter.
You should know what to do now.
It might not be visible with the naked eye, so. I know, I'll check with magic. Un Yuri clenched her teeth and nodded her head.
Soon, the man and woman walked toward the group of naked people. A purple snake tattoo. As Tsuji Yuki stood with her head lowered, Kazuki and Un Yuri began to examine every nook and cranny of Tsuji Yuki's body.
Asterisk.
The morning sky was clear and quiet, but Sin-young had been bustling even before daybreak. Though it may be good news to some, Sin-young had only been receiving one bad news after the other. There was a saying, a rich man can live for 3 years even if they go bankrupt. When Sung Shi-hyun went missing, Sin-young became a loner, left to fend for themselves without Sung Shi-hyun's strength and political influence. However, they still managed to hold on to their position of power for several years. They were able to do this because they had ample military power and because many organizations had formed partnerships with them. The scale of this network of partnerships could not be compared to the old EVA alliance. The EVA alliance was, at best, a union of 8 mid-sized organizations. In contrast, Sin-young's partners were each a top-ranking organization in their respective cities. Their far-reaching influence had a firm grasp on every city except EVA. But now, when 3 years had already gone by since then, the situation was different. Externally, Sung Shi-hyun had reappeared as a traitor, and internally, an organization that was more powerful than Sin-young had appeared. Rallying the Triads, Assassination Guild, Magicians Guild, and Sicilia, this organization was now pointing its spear at Sin-young, cutting off its limbs one by one. They were trying to uproot the foundation that allowed Sin-young to stay on the apex. Sin-young already had their hands full, trying to deal with the incidents that had broken out left and right, but unsurprisingly, another bad news came striking down around noon, today. It was news that the Star of Lust had returned to the Temple of Luxuria. Yun Seahui dazedly stared at the communication crystal that a messenger delivered. Inside the crystal, over 100 priests of Luxuria were gathered at the temple, and Seo Yuhui was sitting on a decorated white throne, speaking to the crowd. The way she addressed the countless priests made her seem like an empress. I'm sure you all know about the recent incident. Bishop Roberto Servillo has betrayed humanity and colluded with the parasites. Her message was clear and simple. As the executor of Luxuria, I cannot let the temple continue on this path.
From today, I will officially return to the temple's main branch. Furthermore, I express deep regret in allowing the bishop's wrongdoings to happen. I will personally join Valhalla and help them wholeheartedly."
And the reactions of luxurious priests were unsurprising. Clap, 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 clap.
Thunderous claps rang out from the video. Who would expect otherwise?
The Temple of Luxuria was the organization of the recent incident's primary culprit, and with the bishop having confessed to his crimes, the organization was surrounded by enemies on all sides. This was when Seo Yuhui, the most coveted priest in paradise, came back, and she said she would even join Valhalla for the two organizations' reconciliation. This meant that Seo Yuhui would be officially joining hands with Sol Jihu, who was predicted to become the next apostle of Gula. Not only was the Temple of Luxuria given a path of survival as an organization, but they would also reconcile with Gula's temple.
How could they not be happy? This was the chance for them to regain the glory of the past. If signing a contract or swearing an oath was all it took, they would be more than happy to do so. If they weren't traitors, of course.
Yun Seahui, who was watching Luxuria's priests cheer loudly, turned off the communication crystal and closed her eyes.
"You're either with us or against us." It was a statement by the American President, George W. Bush, after 9/11.
At the time, the entire world held their breaths at America's unprecedented fury.
Even North Korea and China openly criticized the terrorist organization.
When Pakistan refused America's request to pass through their airspace, they were met with the threat, "Be prepared to be bombed. Be prepared to go back to the Stone Age."
And they ultimately yielded.
The current situation in Paradise was similar. The recent attack had enraged Valhalla, and Sol Jihu proclaimed in front of everyone, "Those who attacked Valhalla, those who devised and supported the plan, and those who knew about the plan and remained silent. I will not distinguish them. Every organization and earthling involved in this matter will have to take responsibility." His actions matched his words.
Il Destino tried to avoid their responsibility and was promptly destroyed.
Hanoi refused their offer and was also destroyed.
On the other hand, the Japan Business Federation and the Arabia Merchant Group bowed to Valhalla and denounced Xinjiang. And now, the Temple of Luxuria was joining the fray.
With things having come this far, Yun Seahui couldn't help but admit that the once solid foundation of Xinjiang was beginning to shake. Right, Sol Jihu was grabbing Xinjiang by the collar.
Shaking it violently, he was chasing this. Asterisk.
You're still going to remain quiet?
Sitting in his office, Sol Jihu sneered coldly.
Still no word from Xinjiang?
No, nothing worth reporting. I've heard they're investigating the case, but that's just something they leaked to the press as a decoy. I don't get it.
Their partners are all turning their backs on them.
Do they really think they can walk away from this like nothing happened? They think they can afford to lose a few limbs.
As long as the head lives, the rest of the body can regenerate. They're confident just like that.
Really? I wonder how long that confidence will last. Sol Jihu muttered to himself and opened his desk drawer.
I can't believe they're doing nothing.
They must have no sense of urgency.
Suddenly, Sol Jihu's hand which was fumbling through the drawer stopped and he blinked in confusion.
Kim Hannah was all smiles. Her eyes sparkled like a girl in love. Thinking back now, she'd been looking like that ever since he started provoking Xinjiang.
Did something good happen to you? Why do you ask?
Your smile is really pretty today.
Don't make me blush.
It's just the makeup.
Kim Hannah cupped her face in her hands with a modest sigh. The truth was that everywhere she went these days, people were telling her how pretty she looked.
There were even rumors about her being in love. Do you remember the promise we made when you first recruited me? The second one, more specifically.
The question was sudden, but Sol Jihu instantly recalled the incident.
Become a big tree. I'm saying you should grow an organization to its fullest extent centered around you.
Big enough so that you can easily look down on Xinjiang. Years had passed since then and Sol Jihu kept his promise. As a private organization, Valhalla was definitely more powerful than Seinen.
Even now, it was putting overwhelming pressure on the pharmaceutical company.
Seinen, which threw her out.
Yun Seahui, who mocked her.
Jung Minjong, who transferred her to the attack team. Kim Hana couldn't help humming with joy whenever she thought about how those three must be feeling now. Her joy was so intense that once, she even danced alone in her room.
She was eating better and exercising more often.
Her bowel movements were regular and she slept like a baby every night.
She felt more energetic than ever, and her skin was softer and smoother.
Such were the effects of the stabilized circadian rhythm. I can't wait for Seinen to come and beg us to talk to them.
Ah, you'll let me accompany you when that day comes, right? Kim Hana asked, shaking her shoulders left and right.
Of course, you'll be my companion.
Sol Jihu gave a small smile. Thank you, representative.
A beaming smile spread across Kim Hana's face.
When you first said you wanted to build an organization, I never thought this day would come. I'm glad I joined Carpe Diem.
It was one of the best decisions of my life. Reminiscence filled Sol Jihu's eyes as he watched Kim Hana smile radiantly.
He recalled the time he saw her through 9 eyes.
The image of Kim Hana as a succubus, laughing hysterically while looking down at the ashes of Scheherazade, still lingered in his head. There was something similar between that version of Kim Hana and the one standing here now. However, even though the situation might be similar, the process and the outcome was completely different. Tiggle Fortress was free, Scheherazade was thriving, and, most importantly, Kim Hana was still a human.
A soft smile spread across Sol Jihu's lips. On the surface, he might appear calm, but he did have a few doubts about his decisions.
He wasn't sure if he was going in the right direction or what waited for him at the end of the road. But Kim Hana's words just now gave him the courage to keep trying.
Whatever the future might be, it would at least be better than the first run.
So, how will you surprise me this time?
Kim Hana asked, her eyes flickering with curiosity. Currently, Seinen was backed into a corner and Valhalla had used up all its resources. She couldn't think of anything more they could do.
But then she remembered Sol Jihu's words. He said that he would pour out an entire barrel of oil if Seinen tried to put out the fire.
The long-awaited moment had finally come. Now it was time for them to pour oil on the burning house.
You may look forward to it.
With a grin, Sol Jihu began rummaging through his desk drawer. I'm sure you know about this already.
Didn't I tell you before I left to train?
Ah.
Kim Hana made a sound of recognition but then tilted her head curiously.
She couldn't see how that related to the current situation.
So rather than attacking the Empire, which has a high probability of failing, I suggest we do something more worthwhile. Something that will benefit us both.
I'll be straightforward. I think you should use the time that this war bought us to regroup humanity.
Do you want to at least hear me out? After their victory in the Tiggle Fortress War, Gabriel had invited Sol Jihu to a meeting with the higher-ups of the Federation and made an interesting proposal.
But this proposal could not be implemented immediately because of its large scale. Almost a year had passed since then.
Sol Jihu had been secretly preparing to bring this proposal to reality.
More precisely, he had focused on becoming stronger and left the rest to a trusted comrade. But enough with the preparation. Now seemed the right time to initiate the grand scheme. Hoyt.
Sol Jihu pulled out a communication crystal from deep within the drawer and placed his hand on top of it.
Asterisk.
After the call, Sol Jihu went to the Eva Royal Palace to check on the progress of the plan.
That plan. Sorg Kun, the royal administrator of Eva, seemed troubled. Preparations are mostly complete. We've secured a wide enough area and have been working together with Dongchun merchants for a long time to stock up on supplies. And, with the recent turn of events, I don't think the residents would refuse either. However,
he assured Sol Jihu that he was almost ready, but judging from the tone of his voice, there seemed to be a problem. "Is it money?" When Sol Jihu saw Sorg Kun smacking his lips, he placed his index finger on his thumb to form a circle.
"Yes," Sorg Kun admitted with a bitter smile. "It's hard enough planning one big event, but I had to take care of two. You should have told me sooner. I'm sorry. This plan is for the good of Eva, so I wanted to make this work without relying on any outside forces," said Sorg Kun, but the truth was he didn't want to put any more pressure on Sol Jihu, who was already so busy. "Don't worry about it." Sol Jihu saw through him and announced with confidence. "Money isn't a problem at all." Sorg Kun blinked. Asterisk. After he returned to Valhalla, Sol Jihu prepared to leave right away. "Flown. Do you want to go on a honeymoon with me?" "Honeymoon?" Flown's head slanted to one side. "I'd take a trip with you any day of the week, but a honeymoon is a bit." "You know I have a husband, right?" "Although I became a widow not long after the wedding." Flown placed her hands on her waist with disapproving eyes. With a light chuckle, Sol Jihu placed his hands over Flown's shoulders. And he spoke. "Don't you think it's a little late for that?" "Excuse me? A little late for what? Are you doubting my fidelity?" "All right, then let me ask you. Who do you like better, your husband or me?" "Huh? That's." Flown seemed visibly shaken by Sol Jihu's question. What did you just say?" "I can't hear you, speak louder." "Or maybe you don't want to go after all?" "No, I do. I want to go. I like you better." Giggling, Flown threw her arms around Sol Jihu. "Ooh-hoo-hoo-hoo. Having an affair is more fun than I thought. So, where are we going?" "To collect the Rothschier's inheritance." "Can I?" "I need it for something." "Aha. Of course, you can. Why do you even ask?" Flown readily consented before suddenly bursting into laughter. "Ah ha ha ha. My husband was supposed to inherit that money, and now I'm basically giving it away. If my family knew, they would be so upset." The laughter continued. Flown seemed content to at least take revenge this way. "I like this. Now then, shall we go, Mr. Partner in Crime?" With a broad smile, Flown clung to Sol Jihu and linked her arms through his. Sol Jihu's face turned bitter. He was only joking, but Flown seemed to have awakened to a new taste. Anyway, Sol Jihu announced to the rest of the organization that he would return in 10 days and went on a honeymoon trip with Flown. Rothschier's inheritance was buried in a total of 5 different areas. The place where gold was buried was in enemy territory, but it was still close to the border. It was as close to the human territory as the ancient emperor's villa, and Sol Jihu was much stronger now than before. So he thought it would be worth a try. Of course, if the parasite queen or the army commanders were to appear, they would be in big trouble. However, it'll be fine. According to the bishop, Sung Shi-hyun told him that it would take about 3 to 4 months for the army commanders to fully recover. This meant they still had time. Sol Jihu traveled to Grazia, located in the northernmost part of human territory, and crossed the sea using the convenient flying artifact named Flown. The number of valuables he had found next to the Rothschier family's secret arts was by no means small, so he couldn't help but look forward to finding out how much would be buried here. The treasure was buried inside a cave near the shore where the water had come into the land. The bay was huge and had several caves, making it difficult for Sol Jihu to locate the correct one at first, but the overall exploration was pretty easy. Unlike the Pagoda of Dreams expedition, all he had to do was find what was hidden. Flown's grandfather seemed to have valued the secret arts more than his treasure. The search ended quickly. Sol Jihu went up a hill, activated his innate ability, and found the spot where red and gold were aligned. In short, the House of Rothschier, one of the 4 great families best known for its wealth, did not disappoint Sol Jihu's expectations. Rather, it exceeded his expectations and went beyond his imagination.
Sol Jihu carefully stepped inside and opened the moss-covered stone gate, located in the deepest part of the cave. When he stepped into the dark space beyond the gate, his jaw dropped instantly. The room of about 330 square meters was filled with old chests that showed the passage of time. Each chest had been carved with the Rothschier's crest and was as large as an adult male's body. The treasure chests were locked, but when Sol Jihu pulled one of them with force, it opened with a squeak. Sol Jihu felt dizzy as soon as he saw the reddish light coming out of the chest. Well-crafted gold bars, not coins, filled the chest so completely that there was not an inch of space left inside. That wasn't the end. Some chests were filled with jewels resembling the night sky, while others were filled with luxurious ornaments, all neatly stacked in piles. What do you think?
Pretty cool, Floan saw the expression of Sol Jihu's face and gloated.
But the next moment her face fell and she said in a pitiful voice, "Take them.
They're all yours." You've already taken my body and my heart.
My honor has been tainted in your hands. So what does money matter at this point? Now that things have come to this, I am ready to sacrifice my everything for you. For the past few days, Floan had been obsessed with the fictional scenario in which she was a married woman from a prestigious family, and Sol Jihu was the scoundrel who corrupted her by force.
Sol Jihu shook his head disapprovingly.
Let's get them moving.
Nothing good will come from spending our time here. Sure, but how are you going to move them? There's only 2 of us here.
She was right. There were simply too many chests for the 2 of them to carry, as there was a limit to the amount that could fit in a space-expanded bag.
I've already thought about it.
Sol Jihu waved his hand in the air with a grin. Immediately the air split in half and from the crack a large hole formed that looked like a black hole.
Whoa!
What's this? It's one of the many convenient features of a unique ranker.
It was true.
When he first became level 7, he was so busy with training that he didn't notice that he had many new convenient authorities that he could acquire. Dimensional Pocket was one of those authorities. The moment he recalled the memory of Seo Yuhui at Huge Stone Rocky Mountain pulling the flower of Soma out of her dimensional pocket, Sol Jihu rushed to the temple and paid contribution points to obtain one of his own.
Sol Jihu rolled up his sleeves.
Just throw the chests into that hole.
Floan, will you help me?
Why, of course. I grew up without knowing a day of hardship, but for you, I won't hesitate to get my hands dirty. Floan?
Ah ha ha ha.
What?
You started it, Tilda. The 2 began moving the chests, laughing and chatting merrily. Asterisk. Sorg-kun had never looked more in awe. He was simply speechless. Sol Jihu had asked for a large storage room and that's where Sorg-kun had taken him. Watch. Gold, come out. Sol Jihu took out a chest from his dimensional pocket and shook it. Gold bars spilled from the opening. Jewels. Come out. With a giggle, a beautiful ghost with silver hair held one of the chests upside down and glittering jewels poured down like a waterfall. No. Sorg-kun's mouth dropped open. Way. And closed only after the treasures they had brought filled 4 storage rooms. Is this enough? Sol Jihu asked, dusting off his hands. When he saw that all of the rooms had been filled with mountains of treasure, the royal administrator closed his eyes and opened them again. With a look of disbelief, he turned to Sol Jihu. Ah, this is the inheritance of Rothschier. Rothschier? You can't mean the Roth Seher, the spear of the empire. Floan nodded and folded her arms.
When her eyes met Sorg-kun's, she made the V sign with both of her hands.
Sorg-kun buried his face in his hands.
What's wrong?
Nothing.
There's just a lot going on that's beyond my understanding.
He answered weakly before shaking his head with force.
Then he turned his gaze to the treasure chests and suddenly blurted in a rush.
I don't need everything. These are the rewards of an expedition and should be divided according to the ratio set by.
But his sentence was cut short by Sol Jihu, who shook his head side to side. Do you have no greed?
Of course I do. But I already have enough to last a lifetime. I have as much as I've given you in my storage.
It's overflowing, really.
Sol Jihu grabbed a handful of jewels and turned his eyes. And the need for money will only increase from now on.
I believe you'll use it for the right cause.
A lot was hidden behind his words.
Sorg Kun's expression turned solemn and he inhaled deeply. Touched by Sol Jihu's faith in him, his eyes burned with passion.
I won't use it just for Eva.
After a moment of silence, he spoke in a voice close to tears.
I'll use it for the whole of paradise.
I swear on my everything.
Could you prioritize odor and Harem? I will. I promise. Sorg Kun saw Sol Jihu smile and tightened his fists with resolve. So the money problem is taken care of.
What about Her Majesty?
I told her about the plan a long time ago. She's already found the royal oath and is ready.
Great. And the script?
She says she doesn't need it. She'd like to speak frankly from her heart. From her heart.
Sol Jihu stroked his chin.
He recalled the time Charlotte Arya rolled on the floor alongside Adelette Delphine, yelling, "Let her! Let her! If it's too much of a burden, I'll gladly take her place." No, it's fine. Sorg Kun's lips curled into the slightest of smiles. I understand why you're worried, but Her Majesty has changed since she started learning magic.
It's a pretty important scene.
I know, but please give her a chance. She'll uphold the majesty of the royal family of Eva, of Arya blood, in front of the whole world.
With that, Sol Jihu could no longer refuse.
Well then. I'll get ready as well. When Sol Jihu returned to Valhalla, he was met with fierce criticism from his administrator.
Are you insane?
Are you insane?
What? You gave them everything? You didn't even leave a single cent behind?
Well, yeah. No. Kim Hannah screeched.
How could you turn everything over?
No, seriously, how could you? She clutched the back of her neck and panted for breath. Sol Jihu asked, disconcerted.
Is Valhalla suffering from a lack of funds?
No, of course not. Right? We have enough. And from what I've heard, we were able to secure quite a bit of money from here and there because of the recent incident. Anyway, try to understand. This plan costs a lot of money. Still, you have to think of profit. Stop being such a pushover.
What? A pushover? It was then.
You.
What did you say?
Floan intervened, unable to conceal her irritation.
Don't make me laugh.
You didn't even participate in the expedition. You see, this guy and I agreed to hand it over.
That's not what I meant.
And, is that even your money?
Nope, it's mine.
I'm the rightful inheritor. So why should you decide what happens to my money?
Who do you think you are? Kim Hannah hesitated to respond. The fact that her opponent was a ghost, a notoriously cruel race, and that everything she said was right, made her speechless.
Still. If only he'd brought half of that money. Kim Hannah fell to her knees, pounded the ground with her fists.
HMPH.
Floan lifted her head with a snort and Sol Jihu smiled bitterly.
At around the same time, ominous energy filled the imperial palace. For the past few days, the parasite queen had been observing the celestial bodies without a moment of rest.
The movement of the stars was, simply put, a wreck.
It was so wild and disorderly that even the parasite queen had difficulty interpreting it. The queen had already figured out the cause of the change. While she was asleep, a group of stars reversed their orbit and collided with the brightest star. But the brightest star didn't even budge, and the stars that crashed into the brightest star were shattered to dust. In the process, the brightest star began to burn even more intensely, creating a massive explosion centered around the cluster of stars in its vicinity. As a result, the celestial orbit was completely distorted and all the stars were being sucked into the storm. The stars either adapted to the new orbit created by the brightest star or shattered after failing to adapt. All of this was the result of the butterfly effect caused by the stars that initially crashed into the brightest star.
Damned fools.
They should have just stayed put.
The parasite queen clenched her teeth.
The problem was that this wasn't the end.
As if the situation wasn't bad as it was, the queen sensed another change was about to take place.
This change, a massive storm, would affect not only the Federation and humanity but also the parasites.
Kook. She could no longer sit idly by and do nothing. You! Her roar of wrath echoed through the palace and spread for several miles. The army commanders felt the wrath of their queen and shuddered. Queen! Your Majesty! All of them turned at once and began to run towards the corrupted throne.
The parasite queen had summoned the 6 army commanders.
Earthlings who weren't related to the Valhalla attack incident had recently started to stay in paradise longer.
It was exciting to see so many organizations that had been boasting their status getting beaten up one-sidedly, and they were also curious to know who the traitors acting secretly in paradise were. Many were also interested to see how this entire incident would come to a close. But simply put, there was nothing more fun than watching a fire burn from across a river. Ever since that incident happened, every day in paradise had been a series of chaos.
New organizations bowed to Valhalla on a daily basis, and some organizations disappeared overnight.
They didn't dare to leave paradise with a drama they couldn't afford to miss being aired 24/7. But no matter how delicious a meal was, one would get tired of it after eating it every day.
Although Seinen, the main dish,
was still remaining, with the situation showing no sign of escalating, the boiling excitement and anticipation began to subside. By the time the fire became noticeably weaker compared to the beginning, a new update arrived to relight the flame.
It was regarding an official announcement by the Eva royal family.
As if that wasn't enough, Queen Charlotte Arya would personally make the announcement.
Once this news was confirmed through various intelligence organizations, Earthlings headed to Eva to see the royal family joining the Earthlings matter. Most people had an idea as to what this announcement would be about.
The Eva royal family was stepping up to the plate? It must be to support Valhalla and further pressure Seinen.
Then Seinen would have a harder time just sitting still.
How would the Scheherazade royal family react?
Most were thinking along these lines. Asterisk. By the time the sun rose to the middle of the sky, the streets of Eva grew rowdy. Earthlings residing in Eva and even Earthlings from other cities had all come out. There were Paradisians in the mix as well. Sol Jihu was waiting inside the royal palace to prepare for anything that might happen.
He was on the rooftop of an appropriate building, looking down at the crowd that was gathering around the palace with his back leaned against the wall. As today was the most important day, a faint tension could be seen in his eyes. How much time went by?
Sol Jihu turned his gaze at the sound of people's murmuring. He could see a familiar girl in the distance. Her hair, which was usually tied in twin tails, was neatly braided up, and a silver-white tiara adorning a red ruby was sitting on her head. The girl, who had clearly taken great care into dressing up for the event, walked out slowly on a terrace on the highest level of the palace. Charlotte Arya had finally made her appearance.
Though she was trying to act dignified, her expression, which did not hide her nervousness, made Sol Jihu chuckle.
On the other hand, he was worried. To Sol Jihu, Charlotte Arya was only a young, lovable girl. He wasn't sure if she could withstand the reaction of such a large crowd. However, the die had already been cast.
Though he was worried, he decided to trust Sorg Kun, who gave his assurance.
Kim Hannah had changed and Sol Jihu himself had changed.
There was no reason for him to doubt that Charlotte Arya couldn't change as well.
Perhaps, she already had. From what he heard,
Charlotte Arya had forcefully dragged Eva's Earthlings to the Tigel Fortress War.
Now was a good time to see whether that was true.
Sol Jihu swallowed his saliva and stared at Charlotte Arya, who was slowly looking around at the crowd. How would she start her speech? What if she freezes up from nervousness?
As Sol Jihu watched, half concerned and half excited. 21 years ago. Charlotte Arya calmly began her speech.
A new alien race appeared on this planet. Though trembling slightly, her voice carried a certain dignity. Speaking in a grand voice imbued with a minute amount of mana, Charlotte Arya started her speech. After the appearance of the parasites, the empire, which reigned supreme at the apex of paradise as the country of the never-setting sun, was razed to the ground in less than 4 years.
Already?
Sol Jihu's eyes widened.
He thought she would start with a brief introduction.
After the fall of the empire, 2 winds of change blew inside paradise, which was on the verge of falling to the parasites' hands.
It was the same for the crowd.
The first change was the appearance of the fallen angels, followed by their establishing of the Federation.
They were all furrowing their brows and looking up at Charlotte Arya.
They had expected her to declare their support for Valhalla and openly denounce Xinjiang at best. So what was this sudden talk of history? The second change was the entry of Earthlings onto this planet.
Charlotte Arya gazed softly at the crowded streets. She surprisingly seemed to have a natural talent for speaking in front of a crowd, as her trembling had subsided before anyone noticed.
It was not bad at first. The earliest Earthlings understood our plight, rapidly grew stronger under the blessings of the 7 sins, and participated in wars for paradise. The 7 kingdoms were also committed to supporting the Earthlings back then, and they gave appropriate rewards to those who made contributions.
Fight with us and receive items of this world as rewards. It was a logical relationship of a clear given and take. That was how it was, at first.
As Charlotte Arya emphasized the last bit, the faces of a few Earthlings stiffened. A lot of time passed since then, long enough for one girl to have her parents and brothers ripped asunder by war and to have risen to the throne alone. Over the last 10 years, countless Earthlings have gone through paradise, and as the influence of the Earthlings grew, so did our relationship.
From a give and take relationship to a one-sided give or take relationship. Displeased looks began to spread on the spectating Earthlings' faces. Of course, I am not saying all Earthlings are like this.
Charlotte Arya cleared her throat.
Some of you certainly have not forgotten about the relationship of the past. In fact, I know there are those who do not hesitate to risk their lives to give to paradise. Let me take this opportunity to express my utmost gratitude and respect to these Earthlings. Charlotte Arya gently closed her eyes, held her skirt out slightly, and curtsied gracefully. But she then opened her eyes and signaled a twist. Unfortunately, a majority of you do not have the qualification to receive my gratitude. Her voice was calm as she dropped this bombshell. The Earthlings blinked at the sudden blow.
Soon, menacing looks surfaced on their faces.
I'm sure you all remember the parasites' attack on Tigel Fortress 1 year ago.
At the time, knowing that the fall of Tigel Fortress would result in the destruction of the Federation, thus exposing Eva to danger, this royal self requested you all to join the war. But what were your reactions? Most of you rose up in protest and criticized this royal self, and one group even barged into the royal palace and threatened this royal self openly. That day, I asked for the first time, "Why?"
Charlotte Arya's voice gradually got louder.
How come?
The air also grew heavier, exerting great pressure.
The few who cared were out there, risking their lives on the boundary of life and death. While everyone stared with expressionless faces, Charlotte Arya continued without the slightest tremble in her voice. So why was it that the vast majority of Earthlings were so proud and trying to avoid their duty as if it is the most natural thing?
Before anyone noticed, the Earthlings were all glaring.
This majority of you are enjoying the benefits of being Earthlings, receiving rewards, and taking pleasure in their activities in paradise. So what of it?
So why are you so busy returning to Earth whenever your precious paradise is in danger?
What are you getting at? What are you trying to say?
Their openly hostile gazes fell on the Queen. Although nothing Charlotte Arya said was wrong, no one was comprehending her message.
Facing their piercing gazes, this royal self is truly curious.
Charlotte Arya endured.
This isn't all.
I'm sure you all are aware of what recently transpired. Fighting hundreds of hostile gazes.
What's the reason?
She asked back. Rather than helping and cheering on the person giving his all to protect paradise. And continuing her words firmly.
For trifling reasons, you, despite having the same duty, choose to attack the person carrying out the same duty?
She quietly expressed her rage.
Did the 7 sins summon you all to this world forcefully?
Those who recognized Paradise's situation and voluntarily accepted its call, they were called Earthlings. Or did we force you into slavery and send you to your doom? Those who campaigned for the freedom and the rights of Paradise, they were called Earthlings. No, we did not. You all were given the freedom of economic activity. You all are citizens who have the duty to protect this land. Despite this, you only pursued benefits, fighting and slinging mud at each other. Whenever there was a draft call, you cursed your country and were busy to return to Earth. How can you ask for the right to pursue profit whilst ignoring the responsibility following it? Such people were Earthlings too. Yet you dare to think you are qualified to be in this world? Are you not ashamed of yourselves? The enraged Charlotte Arya's eyes slowly turned gold. As if that wasn't enough. You try to harm the hero of humanity and the Federation? To prove your worth to the parasite queen? On top of ignoring your duty, you dare to side with the enemy you are supposed to fight? The truth has already been revealed, yet rather than explaining yourselves, you're staying silent and hoping it all goes away. Words cannot describe how aggrieved I am to think such shameless traitors may be listening to me, right now, right here, in this city. Kim Hannah, who was listening to the speech, almost burst out laughing. It was just too beautifully put. She was so focused on listening that she almost glossed over it. Charlotte Arya started by mentioning Paradise's history. She then pointed out the Earthlings' contradictions before mentioning the recent incident and stealthily lumping it onto the crowd. It was like she was suggesting, who's to say you aren't among them? What is she trying to get at by saying all this? Kim Hannah strained her ears with an intrigued look. This royal self has judged that this problem cannot be left alone any longer. And so, for the survival of this world, modeling after the 2 changes of the past that have supported Paradise until now, this royal self vows to enact 2 new changes. Today, in this place. Charlotte Arya raised her main point at last. First, as of today, Eva will formulate a restoration of relationships with the Federation. Going beyond a simple alliance, Eva will become a pillar of support for Tiggle Fortress and take on the role of mutual assistance with the Federation. The crowd buzzed. Formulation of an official alliance with the Federation. This wasn't anything to be surprised about given that Eva already had a tacit alliance with the Federation. But becoming a pillar of support for Tiggle Fortress and taking on the role of mutual assistance? Second. Before anyone could fully process the first vow, Charlotte Arya continued. In Eva, which will carry out Tiggle Fortress rear base missions, having Earthlings, who avoid participating in wars, and traitors, who collude with the parasites, will be the height of outrageousness. And so, the Eva royal family will request for one power over all Earthlings that reside in Eva. The authority to modify the setting that the 7 sins have given you. As soon as Charlotte Arya made this declaration, a heavy silence descended on the city. Some doubted their ears. A royal family asking for the authority to modify an Earthling status window. In truth, this second point was the true core of Charlotte Arya's speech. The status window setting was the source of an Earthling's power. To touch that was to touch the foundation of an Earthling's activity. The representative of Eva royal family's partner organization said this. those who attacked Valhalla, those who devised and supported the plan, and those who knew about the plan and remained silent. I will not distinguish them.
Every organization and earthling involved in this matter will have to take responsibility. This royal self is of the same opinion.
As of today,
Eva will not distinguish between those who do not try to fight the parasites and those who collude with the parasites. Those who cast aside their duty and only pursue their own benefits will come to bear responsibility for their actions.
Kim Hannah closed her eyes. Her throat trembled. She finally understood the true intent behind the recent series of incidents. Seol Ji-hoo was not targeting Sinyoung. The 24 organizations, including Sinyoung, were only stepping stones to his ultimate goal. Right, from the very beginning, Seol Ji-hoo's target had been paradise, the whole of Earthlings.
The fire that was kindled in Eva today would soon spread like wildfire throughout the entire human territory. That wasn't all.
Earthlings who were active in paradise could largely be categorized into two types:
those who were part of an organization and those who were not.
It went without saying that the former were the ones that usually led paradise.
Valhalla and its supporting organizations had no reason to be bothered by the Queen's statement, because it was true that they were fighting the parasites while greatly endangering their lives. Powerful organizations of other cities had no reason to object either.
In fact, they should welcome it.
Because the top 30 or 40% of organizations had all turned their backs on Sinyoung and signed a contract with Valhalla.
The contract had the following provisions.
1. Those who sign the contract shall not collude with the parasites and not do anything against the interest of humanity.
2.
In the case that a war against the parasites breaks out, those who sign the contract shall spare no effort to help humanity.
These organizations were forced to carry out these terms even before Eva's queen made this official announcement.
Naturally, representative organizations of Nur, Grazia, and Caligo were included, and there was no need to even mention Eva, Haramark, and Oder's representative organizations.
In other words, Seol Ji-hoo was forcing Sinyoung to make a decision. Will you take our offer or be left behind in the dust? Hick. So this is what he meant.
When Kim Hannah thought so, she was overwhelmed with emotions and wiped the tears glistening up with a handkerchief. Did I do something wrong? Why is everyone so bent on harassing me? I just wanted to save them, that's all. I didn't have other intentions. It's true that I just did what I wanted at the time, but it's not like I hurt them or inconvenienced them somehow. When she heard Seol Ji-hoo say these words in the past, she was inwardly seething in frustration. But the child from back then, who didn't know the way of the world, had grown to the level of setting up such a grand scheme. Not only that, but he was also trying to devour everything, to grasp the world in the palm of his hand.
Kim Hannah held onto her stained handkerchief and gazed at the crowd. He set the foundation to minimize opposition as much as possible, but still. It was probably wishful thinking to expect zero backlash.
What was that? You're going to meddle with our settings?
And lo and behold, fierce outcries burst out. We've had enough. Insane.
You're completely insane.
All the talk for this. You just want to use us as slaves. You must be mad. All sorts of sharp criticisms were hurled toward the queen. It showed how Earthlings currently viewed paradisians. Charlotte Arya scanned the streets with cold eyes. No. She spoke with a snort.
For you all, who shut your ears and interpret my words however you want, this royal self will say it clearly one more time. We will only meddle with the settings of those who do not try to fight the parasites and those who collude with the parasites. If you are an Earthling who knows to perform the duty that follows your freedom, you should have no reason to object to this rule. I am saying the royal family will investigate and eliminate potential traitors like the ones from the most recent incident. Should you not be happy about that? Or could it be that the ones who are angry have been promised something by the parasite queen? The commotion died down in an instant. No one could find the words to object. There was no way to find fault with what she said. You don't answer the important question, yet you call me crazy."
A mocking smile emerged on Charlotte Arya's face. She sighed and then raised her hands above her head. "Right, I must look like a crazy woman to you all.
But to me, you're the crazy ones."
Right, both you and I are crazy.
It's not just us.
This world itself has gone crazy. If it is to survive in this crazy world, I will not hesitate to do crazy things."
She then held up the tiara on her head. This is a token of royal oath, which the 7 kingdoms were promised in return for serving the 7 sins. At the time, second brother and I each received 1 each.
When Campbell Arya used his royal oath, he said this:
"Don't use this precious item for something like reviving a family member.
Use it for paradise, when it needs it the most. It seems that time has come." Charlotte Arya slowly lowered the royal oath to her chest. She then spoke in a solemn, imposing tone. "Hear me, earthlings. This royal self will go to the temple immediately after this. Using this token of an oath, which even the gods cannot refuse, I will formalize what I announced today. Not by Valhalla's will, not by the 7 sins' will, but by my own will. Those who object to my will." Peetst. Charlotte Arya's eyes, which were glowing in a golden hue, crackled with golden-yellow electricity. "Leave." A thunderous voice struck down on the area. "Such people have no right to be in Eva.
This Eva will reject them.
On the name of Arya."
"I will not say it a second time."
She pointed to the palace gate and then turned around. Sol Jihu was smiling, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "She's even better than I thought."
Now that things had progressed to this point, an indescribable emotion welled up inside him.
For some reason, he liked how the streets had gone silent from shock.
He wanted to savor this air a little longer, but he took his back off the wall after seeing Charlotte Arya walking toward the main gate.
Wait. Are you really going to do this?"
As soon as Charlotte Arya walked out to the streets, earthlings crowded around her from all sides with hostility. However, they paused before they got anywhere near her.
It was because Sol Jihu was following her along with the members of Valhalla. Representative Sol. Seeing the crowd filling up the path to the temple, Chohong called Sol Jihu. When Sol Jihu nodded slightly, Chohong grinned and flew forward, violently striking down the thorn of steel. Boom! A large crater formed on the ground.
The destructive power of the strike was unbefitting of a simple swing of the arm.
It was the result of enhancement stones strengthening the weapon.
As Chohong stared at the crowd with her unique, piercing gaze, the earthlings backed off in shock.
Like Moses parting the Red Sea, a path opened up between the crowd. Sol Jihu walked up to Charlotte Arya. Standing beside her, he could clearly feel Charlotte Arya trembling faintly. He felt like she would reach out with her tiny hand and grab the hem of this shirt.
However, Charlotte Arya did not do so.
She held back.
Guarded by Valhalla and its supporting organizations, she walked forward with her tiara held tightly in hand. Cutting across the silent streets, she did not show a single sign of weakness until she arrived at the temple. That day, Charlotte Arya carried out her words using the royal oath, and the 7 sins shared control over a part of the setting they created. This was limited to those who did not try to fight the parasites, those who colluded with the parasites, and major criminals. The authority to drop or restore their stats, and even seal or eliminate their ability was granted.
Along with it came the authority to permanently bar entry into paradise. All to the Queen of Eva.